What's good, folks, family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth to another episode of Disguise Coverage, the only podcast in existence that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin and is presented by the best pizza in Buffalo, New York, and that is One Pie Pizza. You can find the online menu in the episode show notes here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app and or platform you are listening to this show on. I'm your host, Anthony. Find me on Twitter at pro__. And in tonight's episode, pretty straightforward, taking a detour from the normal in-season game episode or episodes of Disguise Coverage, where we usually dive into the matchups and film of the past game in some form or fashion, do some stock up, stock down, preview the upcoming opponent in terms of who they are schematically and structurally. But like I said, we're detouring from that a bit in this episode tonight with the news today coming down the pike of Ken Dorsey being removed as offensive coordinator of the Buffalo Bills, which I'm sure for some is a little bit of ding dong, the witch is dead a little bit. I'm sure several of you, probably more than several, are dancing down the yellow brick road as the horse house has fallen up on Ken Dorsey and he's out. I'm seeing a whole bunch of comments coming through already. Going to bring up a bunch of those, make this episode as interactive as we potentially can. On the back end of this episode, I'm very excited to welcome back Kendall Mirsky to the show, someone who used to work on the film room or in the film room with myself and Eric Turner, used to be a frequent guest here on Disguise Coverage. He's going to be joining us a little bit around, the 30-40 minute mark from here. As we dive into a lot of detail and pieces when it comes to Dorsey, Joe Brady, where this team was, where this team is, who they're going to be going forward. There's so much to this, all, I don't want to say culminating, but I guess arising from a very, 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 very disappointing loss to the Denver Broncos last night, a loss that really, I think overall was, and we're going to get into this more as we go along in the show, but I think the Broncos game last night was such a good microcosm of this Buffalo Bills offense, what they've been since about the week 5 mark, where you have certain schematic and play call pieces definitely being less than ideal. Like running mesh on 4th and 2 or 4th and 1, running it at all, really, like we've talked about in the film room, but especially in that down and distance. But then also a lot of individual player execution failures, the drops, the turnovers, the Josh Allen interception to end the half, and all of it, the Bills have been stuck in this rut schematically, but also from an execution standpoint. And all of these pieces have kind of blended together and have muddied the waters when it comes to source points for the struggles for this offense that we've really seen since about week 5, since that Jacksonville game, which, even amidst all these struggles, as I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, the advanced metrics still point to this offense being a good offense and being an efficient offense, which we're also going to dive into in this episode in terms of putting things into perspective, in terms of, what Dorsey was, what Dorsey is, what this offense was, what this offense is, and what it potentially can be under Joe Brady going forward, given what he did in his not brief stint, about a year and 3/4 stint as offensive coordinator in Carolina. But then what challenges he'll face with this team taking over, not necessarily just taking over the team in general from the offensive side, but more so taking over the offensive side of the ball for this team at this point in the year, going into week 11 for this Buffalo Bills team, in terms of what's already been established, what you can fix, what you can't. So there's a lot to go down when it comes down the rabbit hole of this conversation. I'm going to start to pull up some comments from the chat, because I know, again, this has been a very hot button topic issue for a lot of people. And we always like to make this show as interactive as possible, but especially for something that is as large scale as this is, which is a significant piece, right? You usually have like your 3 heads of the team: the head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. One of those heads is gone, and it's been a head that a lot of people have been clamoring for to be removed really since last year for some, but a lot of vocality, if that's a right word, coming for Ken Dorsey's head this year. So I want to make this as interactive as possible. I'm going to say that a lot throughout the episode. So questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, whatever you got, throw it up into the chat. Voice your pleasure, your displeasure, your concern, questions, thoughts, statements, whatever you got. Start to go through. Grab this first one from Cal, who says, I haven't been as critical of Dorsey as some. I think what we saw was part of a strategy to limit Josh's hits, but it's a strategy that wasn't working. Yeah, I think the whole Allen Dorsey conversation has been really I think it started to turn into like a chicken egg scenario in terms of like which one kind of came first. And I know Dorsey was being used as this kind of cure-all blanket answer for the struggles of Josh Allen, even going so far as anytime Allen would make a poor decision or a mistake, it was because he was being coached incorrectly, or he was being setting up for failure, or even just something as I saw a lot of comments too when Allen would make a poor decision and people would still find a way to blame Dorsey and be like, well, Dorsey's got to rein him in and make him not throw those passes like that. There was just a lot of blame going Dorsey's way for, the errors in the Josh Allen game. But I do think some of those errors in Josh Allen's game did stem from him kind of being, I don't want to say, I know verbiage that was being thrown around was like neutered or being kind of kept in the pen a little bit. I think some of it was strategic. But I do think that meshing, of Allen and Dorsey, or Allen in Dorsey's system, just led to play for Josh Allen this year that was efficient, but also had a lot of just hitches and a lot of kinks to it, or kinks in it, kind of like in the machine. I broke down several on Twitter. Myself and Eric have gone into them in the film room, just things that Allen was missing, like basic hot reads and basic reads in general in a concept, like, okay, you have two players over here to the left. If the defender does A, you go to this guy. If he does B, you go to the other guy. And then it's like, oh, okay, cool. The player did A, make your throw. And Allen just wouldn't. Like, there were issues in Allen's game, and whether it was on Allen or because of what was going on with Dorsey, it created this muddled up scenario and situation. I see your follow-up here, Kel. It says, that said, there wasn't a lot of creativity. Play was consistently sloppy, and there's something to be said for executing someone. Oh, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that in French. I like what you said there. I think to we've talked about it on the show here, the biggest challenge with Dorsey's offense, I don't think Dorsey's offense is bad necessarily, but like we've talked about on the show, like we've talked about in the film room, a lot of it is very half and half in terms of field reads at times. And it'll be like, okay, like on the left side, you have a play that'll be cover 2. On the right side, you have a play that'll be cover 1 or cover 3 or whatever. And then, so it's on Josh to ID the coverage, and then on the snap, read things post snap, make the throw. Then you've also got the added layer of a lot of this offense being kind of read and react from a weapons standpoint, in terms of on the snap, you read the leverage of the defender and or read the coverage. If it's A, you do this. If it's B, you do that. And when you get into that kind of scenario and situation, it can put a lot on players, not just the quarterback, but from the weapon standpoint as well, because they have to do so much mental work post snap, and that can lead to you not playing fast, and or just the basic nature of, you have to be seeing what the receiver next to you is seeing and what the quarterback is seeing. You all have to see the same thing, and you all kind of have to see it at the same time in order to be able to execute in rhythm and on time. That can be a little difficult as well. And then, from a creativity standpoint, it's been established Ken Dorsey's not a schemer. He's more just like, hey, here's the plays. Here's the play to beat this coverage. Here's this play to beat that coverage. Go out, read it, make it happen, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And maybe and I'm not saying Josh Allen isn't good at processing or isn't a cerebral quarterback, but maybe if he has somebody who is more mechanical or is more process based, maybe his offense works better for that person. But it is interesting knowing, I think my bigger thing with it in tying all of this together and the struggles between Allen and Dorsey has been, Allen vouched for Ken Dorsey. Like, he wanted Ken Dorsey as the offensive coordinator. Not that it makes everything okay, but it is interesting. Like, you would think that if you picked somebody to be your play caller and your offensive coordinator, it would be someone who fit you to a T, from an ideology standpoint, from a philosophy standpoint, from a concept standpoint. So that's when it starts to go further and be like, okay, is Allen not executing? Is it Allen's fault? Is it Dorsey's fault? Is it something else? Is it someone in particular? And like most issues or problems in football, there rarely, if ever, is a time where the problems or shortcomings are all one person's fault, or all one side of the ball's fault, which is another thing we're going to get into on this episode. But I like where your head's at, Cal. Oh, I got to stop because there is a super chat. Ben, appreciate you being here, Ben, and thank you very much for the super chat and hopefully some kind words as I'm about to read here. Ben says, appreciate the actual analysis. My sense, we don't play with joy anymore on offense. Where are all the videos of the team jamming out like a few years ago? We just feel tight. Appreciate Appreciate the comment there, Ben. I think there's something to be said for that to a degree. Maybe not necessarily the joy piece. I can't speak to how players feel and what they're feeling emotionally and what they're engaging like in practice and what's going on in between the years. But I think from a tightness standpoint, I think that's a good point because when you have a certain level of expectations and you're not hitting those expectations, which this Buffalo Bills team has not, I don't think that's a shock to anyone. This team is 5-5. I know we all recognize the strength of schedule the Bills had this year and how difficult that schedule was going to be. But at this point, it's not just the amount of losses that this team has had, but the kinds of losses that they've had and to the teams that they've lost to. When that starts to happen, and, putting that in conjunction with just not hitting your expectations, you start to tighten up a little bit. And when things go wrong, it makes everything tighter. When someone drops a pass, or last night's game is a good example too. The Bills come out, they win the toss, they take the ball, they know the struggles they've had offensively. Latavius Murray and that players only meeting for the offense. Everyone reads, as much as they don't maybe lean into it or talk about it, they read what's going on social media and in the papers and all that kind of stuff. They know what's being said about the offense in this group. And imagine you come out and you take the ball and you're ready to go make a statement like the Bengals did to you the previous week, and the very first play, you fumble the ball. I can't imagine the gut punch that is to the entire offense. Like, it's just one of those like, oh, like, dude, here we go again. And I think that tightness builds and it builds and it builds. And with every incompletion, with every punt, with every turnover, with every missed field goal, with every stop, anything culminates and it builds little by little. Some, you add a little bit more to the meter, some you add a little bit less. But I think that, feeling that things feel tight, or saying, Ben, that, the Bills aren't playing with joy anymore on offense. I don't know if it's necessarily joy, but I think it feels heavy from a mental load perspective and a stress level perspective when you watch this team operate. And I think it's because they feel the stress. They know they're not hitting expectations. And when you're caught in that rut and then things don't go well, it's easy to get back into that mindset and be like, oh, like, here we go again. Like, this sucks. Appreciate you, Ben. That's a good analysis. I like that. Let's go back to the comments. Just the Tippy Canoe. Always love that name. My thoughts on the switch is incomplete. We don't know enough about Brady calling plays to make a really good guess. Go Bills. I think that is very, very set. This is an interesting comment here. My main thought is that if Josh doesn't stop turning the ball over at an alarming rate, then Dorsey won't be the last coach fired. I think what's interesting about that piece as well, I think not that. I wonder if the Bills win that game last night, is Ken Dorsey still offensive coordinator today? Does Ken Dorsey not get fired if the Bills win that game? I think that's like my biggest question. And also, even with the performance of the Bills offense last night, which is something, again, I want to put into perspective because, again, they lost the game. They scored 22 points. But from a drive perspective, again, this idea of putting everything onto the plate of Ken Dorsey. If you look at the Bills' drives last night, first drive ends with the James Cook fumble. The second drive ends with the Gabe Davis drop that turns into an interception. The third drive ends 5 plays, 13 yards. Latavius Murray drops a pass on second down. On third down, Josh Allen misses Stephon Diggs. Also gets some pressure. The fourth drive, 3 and out, Dalton Kincaid drops the ball on third down. The fifth drive is a touchdown. The sixth drive is the 1-play interception at the end of the first half. The seventh drive is the failed fourth down, bad mesh call, given the situation and their failure on that play concept. But also, Allen still extends, has Shakir, misses him. The next drive is a touchdown. The drive after that is 3 plays, 37 yards. Allen loses the ball as he hands it off to James Cook, and we get a fumble. The next drive is 6 plays, 26 yards, and a punt. And then the final drive is 6 plays, 75 yards, and a touchdown. There is so much that's happening from an individual variability standpoint from the players, individual execution. That's why I think last night's game was so funny. There were so many things that were going wrong and yes, things start from the top. I understand that. If you're going to use Ken Dorsey as the source point, or if you want to go above that and say Sean McDermott, you kind of trickle everything down from there. But so many things went wrong in that game last night that had nothing to do with Ken Dorsey. And I even saw some, Allen throws the ball to Gabe Davis and it ricochets off his hands. It gets intercepted. And I saw some comments in my mentions of, Well, the passing window isn't big enough, so Allen has to put extra zip on the ball, which led to the drop and led to the interception. Like even that, and that's not true. That passing window was huge. Allen, could he have put the ball a little more on Gabe Davis's chest? Sure. That's just a plain old drop. That's just a drop, which is bad enough in and of itself. But then you get the added bad luck effect of it ricochets and it gets intercepted. All these pieces, the James Cook fumble on the very first play, Josh Allen losing the ball out of his hands when trying to hand it off to James Cook that leads to another fumble. Even though there's the fortuitous bounce that they had on the big James Cook run where he fumbles again, but it bounces back to him. So many pieces and things that were happening in that game that weren't Ken Dorsey's fault. Now, does that mean he is blameless? Absolutely not. There are problems that arise from his structure, his schematics, his play calling, and the sequencing of all of it. I, for one, low-hanging fruit for me, I think the Bills are a good running football team and they need the run game. I hate how inconsistent the run game is. It feels like it takes this offense kind of going off the rails a little bit for him to be like, all right, you know what, let's commit to the run. Like they did in this game, like they did in that Giants game. Like that's been a big gripe for me. But there's a lot of individual variables from an execution standpoint. And I don't want to say a bad luck standpoint, but I'll say from a turnover or drive stalling perspective that has really hurt this offense. And it's been an unfortunate piece. But, if Dorsey's head is the one that has to roll, Dorsey's head is the one that's going to have to roll. Let's keep going here in some of the comments. Andrew saying, I just keep going back to the Patrick Peterson comment on the predictability of some of the offense. Yeah, I think there is some of that predictability piece. I know if I've gotten to a point where I can see a formation or I can see a piece of motion or I can see a down in distance, and in my head, I can say, oh, here comes this play. And then it happens. If I'm saying that, I would think that NFL players and opposing coaches are also thinking that same thing or noticing that some of that. So I do think there was that element of predictability, and then pairing it with a lack of creativity and or scheming up of players or situations. I think that also culminates in making things feel tight, to go back to Ben's comment earlier. Oh, just a nice general comment here from a ton of bricks. Good evening, Bills Mafia. Greetings, Amp. Appreciate you. Thank you for being here. Pete. What's up, Pete? Pete says there's plenty of blame to go around, but the offense wasn't playing up to its potential for most of the past 6 weeks. I think that's a very fair comment. I think just what gets muddied with it is how much blame falls on Ken Dorsey versus a player execution standpoint. Because I think and again, this is not me saying that Ken Dorsey is blameless. I think there's just been so much blame to go around. And again, that Broncos game is a good microcosm for the Bills offense. You have certain schematic and play calling pieces being less than ideal. And then you also have a bunch of individual player execution failures. And now maybe for some people, what I'm about to say is more of a Band-Aid fix and thus isn't a real quote unquote fix because, you think Ken Dorsey is the Antichrist and you want him gone. But if there's better execution from an individual player standpoint, that Denver game looks vastly different from a game flow perspective, game script perspective, and a total points perspective. And I'm not asking for better execution in that Denver game or saying if there's better execution. I'm not saying it in a way that's asking too much of the players. This is asking for better execution, like catch the football. Don't lose the grip on the football when you're handing it off. So if Dorsey being fired is the impetus towards better execution for the players, if this is one of those like come to Jesus moments for Josh Allen or the rest of the offense and everybody decides, hey, we got to get our collective stuff together. If that's what leads to better performance for the offense, awesome. Because again, while I do think there were schematic issues with Ken Dorsey, I do think there was a good or significant amount of blame that needed to be placed onto the players from a player execution standpoint. And again, I'm not saying that's the biggest piece. And you can tie this into the larger conversation piece of regularly asking too much of the players, which is something that I think Ken Dorsey did. If you are constantly asking your quarterback to go out and have to read everything, play after play after play from a protection standpoint and a front standpoint to a coverage standpoint and a passing concept standpoint, if you're doing that, and on top of it, asking the receivers and the weapons to have to consistently read leverage and coverages with everything that defenses do nowadays, it's understandable why that can be very mentally taxing. And that's a heavy mental load to have to wear, consistently for a team. But I know the execution piece can fall or tie into the quote unquote, regularly asking too much of the players. But certain pieces that I feel like get overlooked to a decent degree, especially when it comes to Josh Allen, need fixing from an execution standpoint. And again, we've talked about it with Allen. And if you want to blame it on Dorsey, that's fair. But some pieces just you can't blame on a coordinator, like the failed hot reads pieces. Failing in some of his passing progressions, his decision making, some of his accuracy. Granted, the shoulder injury, I think a bit is present to some degree. And so, using Dorsey as the complete blame for anything and everything that has gone wrong with this Bills offense, and as a blanket answer or explanation for any player execution issue is too much. For me, I think tying it all together, the bigger issue is the mistakes that were consistently happening or frequently happening, and not really showing too much in terms of those mistakes being rectified or being built upon or fixed going forward. I think that is the bigger issue. And if you want to tie that into Ken Dorsey, that's fine. But it's just, again, for this firing, and I know this was building, right? This isn't just a result or a reaction to a one game failure or a one game loss. He didn't get fired because the Bills lost to the Denver Broncos. It was a culmination of a multitude of things. Maybe even going back to last year for all we know. And I know what Sean McDermott said in his presser today, but he uses so much coach speak and so much, generalization with what he says. I don't really buy into too much of what he's selling in press conferences. But that piece there, I think there's so many variables and so much gray when it comes to where the blame gets put. So I think Pete's comment there is spot on. There's plenty of blame to go around, but the offense wasn't playing up to its potential for most of the past 6 weeks. And I think that's fair. And I think some of that's on Dorsey. And I also think some of that's on the player execution piece. And, maybe Joe Brady taps into the players in a different way and gets them to execute at a higher clip. Or maybe Dorsey getting fired again is that come to Jesus moment and players start to play better or execute better. But there are so many things that went wrong for this offense since week 5 that aren't Ken Dorsey's fault. Now, they potentially can stem from Ken Dorsey if you really want to go that route, which is fair and understandable. But I think the issues for this offense and the issues for Josh Allen and what we're seeing for them on the field, I think it's deeper and it goes further and farther than just being like, well, it's Ken Dorsey's fault. Well, it's Ken Dorsey's fault, and I'm not saying, Pete, I'm not saying you're saying that. I'm just using your comment as the kind of jump off point for that. Where do we go? Bum, 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 bum. Oh, Elizabeth comes in and says, how can we honestly believe Dorsey is responsible for the quote unquote neutering of Josh with all the comments by McDermott and Bill Belichick? RJ, you're nothing if not predictable. RJ saying, I still say the headspace Josh is in, it's really Dorsey's fault. Even rookie Josh didn't throw it right at defenders like he has done this year. But also, even when like Josh in Brian Dable's last year, he had 18 turnovers, which was the third most in the NFL. Josh is a turnover prone quarterback. It's who he is. We've talked about it on the show a bunch. It is the yin and yang aspect of Josh Allen. He's Brett Favre reincarnate. He makes some throws and plays that are amazing, and he makes some throws and plays that are dumb and no one should ever attempt. And even when he makes the dumb ones that no one should attempt, sometimes he still pulls those out of his hat. And that's the yin and yang in Josh Allen. He makes the impossible real, and he makes the basic look complicated and hard at times. That's just who he is. But you putting like the poor decision making on Josh or on Ken Dorsey, that's again too far. Like, it's just too much. Like, you can't find a way to blame Ken Dorsey for Josh Allen looking at a defender and throwing it right at the defender for an interception or completely blowing a read. There are certain pieces that, regardless of coordinator, regardless of coaching, are basic football level decisions and or reads at the quarterback position. And Josh isn't doing that. And again, if you want to tie it into, well, Ken Dorsey has made him regressed or Ken Dorsey has broken him or the larger, bigger conversation, I understand it for some, but for me, that's too far. Like, you can't blame everything on Ken Dorsey. Certain things schematically or from a rhythmic perspective and design and sequencing perspective, I think that's completely fair. There's a lot of credence to that, which I've talked about on the show. Going back to last year, myself and Eric are broken down in the film room, but man, for a lot of those throws where Allen's just throwing it right at dudes or not seeing a guy, like, that's not on Dorsey. Like, there's a bunch of that's on Josh Allen. We can't give Josh Allen a pass for everything. Oh, Pops coming in and say, we need less Hollywood Josh Allen and more Wyoming Josh Allen. Oh, I like this comment from Roy who says Hollywood Allen and Hollywood Hogan, the next AEW tag team champions. I think that is very good. That is very good. J-Dub says, it looks to me more like Allen isn't seeing what the receivers are seeing on the option routes. Even though they're open, they aren't going where he expects and missing his throwing windows. I think that happens at some time, right? I think that's where you're seeing some of the, or on sometimes. I think that's where you're seeing some of the spacing issues at times. Just guys not seeing things either correctly or on the same wavelength, receiver to receiver, receiver to tight end, pass catching option to Josh Allen, so on and so forth. But I think a lot like my bigger things for the things that Josh Allen isn't seeing were more just the basic like hot read stuff. Like, okay, looking at this guy, if that guy blitzes, this receiver here is hot. Cool. If that guy blitzes, you throw it to this receiver. And Allen seeing that and not throwing the ball, or Allen not seeing it at all. Like there were the bigger things. I would be more forgiving if it was, okay, this was an option route and this guy zigged when Allen thought he was going to zag. If it was going to be that type of thing more consistently, but I think it's from an Allen failure standpoint. I think it's just been more basic level decision making things and pieces where it's just like, oof, like that's like he was making errors that have nothing to do with Dorsey or Dable or whoever's calling the plays. Like it's basic. If you're a quarterback in high school on a JV team, a hot read is a basic thing. That guy blitzes, you throw it to that guy. Boom, that's it. Like he was failing on that type of stuff. And again, maybe it's connected to a bigger picture and what was going on with the offense and maybe Allen's confidence or processing or what maybe he was pressing too much for whatever reason. But again, it was just a giant disconnect from this offense, absolutely as a whole. Oh, I gotta stop because we got multiple super chats. We got to stop. Just the tip of canoe says Kincaid is coming along. How is Brady going to approach the 11-12 personnel element once Dawson Knox comes back? Go Bills. Appreciate you again for being here. Thank you very much for the super chat. So I'll go ahead in my notes here. So Joe Brady, again, offensive coordinator in Carolina, 2020 and 2021. Just for reference, in those years, Christian McCaffrey was hurt significantly, both in 2020 and 2021, was on injured reserve for a good chunk of each of those years. But in both years, 2020 and 2021, Joe Brady used a bunch of like heavier or pro personnel alignments. So 2020, 18% 12 personnel usage rate, an 8% 21 personnel usage rate, and a 5% 22 personnel usage rate. And then in 2021, 18% again for 12, 8% again for 21, and 6%, so 1% higher for 22 personnel. But again, in 2021, he didn't last the whole year, was fired on December 5th, but got through about 3/4 of the season. I think you're going to see Dalton Kincaid continue to have to be used as a pass catcher in this offense. I think, again, even though he's only a rookie, he offers a different dynamic and a different element to the passing game than Dawson Knox does. Dawson Knox is still the better blocker. I don't think that's in question whatsoever. But Dalton Kincaid just offers a different feel. His fluidity, his technicality, his ability to process and read leverage and read coverages, in addition to his athleticism. He just offers he's a different type of cat and different type of animal when he's out there as a receiver and out there in the route distribution. So I think with Dawson Knox coming back, my hope is that Dalton Kincaid is still the number one pass catching tight end option. But it'll be interesting to see how much they lean back into the 12 personnel piece, which was such a influential personnel grouping to start this year and throughout the offseason with the drafting of Dalton Kincaid. I do think once Knox comes back, you'll see him used more as that inline tight end when they're on the field together. And again, this is a personnel grouping that Brady is comfortable with. Like he's comfortable with two tight ends on the field, whether it's 12 personnel or 22 personnel, or even again, depending on how some of these sites classify a fullback or a tight end or an H-back, that can influence like the 21 personnel grouping. So Brady's used to using heavier personnel groupings and packages in the NFL. And then given the state of the wide receivers with this team, we'll see what he leans into. A lot of it's going to be a big question mark, though, to be honest. Like maybe Joe Brady's been sitting there the whole time and he thinks Deontay Hardy's amazing and hasn't been used enough. Maybe he thinks Khalil Shakir is awesome and hasn't been used enough. Maybe he thinks Reggie Gilliam is like the key to unlocking the offense and he leans into him a bunch. There's a lot of unknowns and variables when it comes to Brady in terms of what he feels and thinks for this offense. But going back to his tenure in Carolina, he's very comfortable leaning into heavier personnel packages like 12, 21, and 22. Eric Stevens, appreciate you being here, Eric. Thank you for the super chat. Eric says, what should we expect from Brady this week? What would be a success metric? Less option routes, more under center, more than 8 points in the first half? For me, I'm looking to see how he establishes the run game initially. And I know that's a big old school mentality for a lot of folks, but I think so much for this Bills team stems from their run game. Their EPA per attempt on the ground this year, they're third. That includes quarterback runs. If you remove quarterback runs, they're fourth on the year. The run game was a nice piece for them to lean into that against the Giants. That was a significant portion of why they won that game. The run game was very influential early in the year in their big wins, all of them, the Washington game, the Raiders game, the Miami game, the threat of it, the presence of it, and the ability to genuinely churn out like 5 to 6 yards a clip and or some explosives at times. For me, a successful piece for Joe Brady is getting that run game established early, leaning into tackle wrap and dart and duo and making that piece work. That's number one for me. And then number two is just getting Josh Allen comfortable. Like, what do we see him doing? And again, so much of Allen executing and being comfortable is going to, again, come down to Josh Allen. There's been throws all year, from an explosive standpoint that are available downfield in the intermediate or, 20 yards and more. There's guys that are open. There's throws that are to be made, and Josh just hasn't made them. So I think some of this too will come down to, if Josh Allen is better, so many of these issues and problems go away, regardless of who the coordinator is, right? It's the same thing with the offensive line protection issues the past several years, where Josh Allen covered up so much of that. But just from a Joe Brady standpoint, for me, a success metric is getting that run game going early, getting Josh into a rhythm, consistently being able to move the ball. Like a lot of the things, honestly, that I was measuring Dorsey for with success. Now, if the Bills are moving the ball and Allen, turns the ball over in the low red zone or somebody drops it or there's a fumble, I don't really want to. There's so many things that can affect how many points are scored. So I don't want to judge Joe Brady off of how many points this team puts up. I know points are the end all be all and it's what determines the games, but I don't necessarily think that's the best metric from a point or process standpoint. So for me, it's, can he establish the run? Do we see any little wrinkles? Is there any more motion? His time in Carolina, where's my notes? 2020, they had a 54% motion rate, which was the 7th highest in the league. And so also granted with motion, there's a difference in using motion to identify coverages versus using motion for leverage and or to create, space or create availability or, scheme somebody open with that piece. So we'll see what kind of motion he potentially leans into. But for me, I'm expecting a lot of what we've seen already. As disappointing as that may sound, it's a short week with the Bills playing on Monday. And then having the turnaround time here. So you lose a day. And just from the general logistics, it's hard you're not going to implement a brand new offense after week 10 in the NFL. The most that you can really do is, it's more realistic changes in terms of personnel usages, play calls overall, the sequencing, situational go-tos. It'll be more like dials and levers being kind of pushed and pulled in different direction than it is like getting new buttons and getting new dials and getting new levers. So I don't expect a wholesale change. I'm looking to see if there's little tweaks here and there from an expectation standpoint. But for success for me is getting Josh Allen comfortable and leaning into this run game and letting the run game do a lot of the work, which I also think ties into getting Josh Allen comfortable. Maz Vids, thank you for being here. Thank you for the super chat. Maz says, Josh is washed. The best we can hope for is a career-ending injury. Okay, I'm sorry. I can't read that comment. Like, you can't do that, man. Why would you wishfully hope for a career-ending injury to a person? That's awful, man. Like, these guys are people. I know you're like a Bills fan, I think, or a sports fan, and you want your team to win, but wishfully hoping for someone to get injured and have it being a career-ending injury, that's a horrible thing to wish upon a person. This is a game that, we enjoy watching and for entertainment purposes, but these are still dudes with lives and families, and hoping for a career-ending injury to someone is a horrible thing. That's a horrible thing to wish on a person. Let's go to this comment from Theodore. Theodore says Allen is a gunslinger, and every gunslinger needs a good run game and play action pass. Dude has had everything on his shoulders, needs to just take what's there and build off of each play and be patient. And here's the piece, too, right? I think what's interesting, I like this comment from Theodore. The whole be patient aspect, Allen does it or has done it, but you could tell that he's itching to get more into that gunslinger piece. And I wonder if Brady taps into a bit more of the kind of unicorn Josh Allen. Granted, I think Dorsey leaned on that a bit too much at times last year, but I understand the semblance and the notion from folks where it's like, Josh Allen just feels penned in. The neutered comment got thrown in there earlier. He just doesn't seem like the same alien type of quarterback that he's capable of being. But he does need to take what's there more. It's funny, as ultra or hyper efficient as this offense has been, sometimes to its own detriment. There's still times where there's plays to be made underneath, and Allen's just not taking them. There's throws that he's taken short that are because they're in the progression and the read that he has to take short. But there are some throws that a little check down here, or how many smash concepts have we seen where Dalton Kincaid or someone is open underneath and he's just forcing the ball to that corner route or forcing that whole shot, which again, he has made at times. So it's understandable why he takes that risk. Again, the yin and yang of Josh Allen. But I think starting over with Brady, especially knowing how Josh Allen is, where when things go awry, he tries even harder to make up for it. And that's when things snowball and can go worse and go bad. The Jets game this year in week 1 is a perfect example. But I do think for this week, it's part of the reason why I want the run game established. Establish the run game, let Josh Allen breathe, get into a rhythm, not have to think that everything is on his shoulders, not getting in his own head too much, take what's there, build off each play and be patient. Exactly like you said. Like, I think that's a really good recipe, especially against a tremendously good defense in the New York Jets. Establish the run early, build the play action and RPO game off of that, and let the game come to you. I don't know how much pinpoint attacking you're going to be doing against this Jets defense, especially with how they've had the Bills offense's number last year and this year. But I think that's a good recipe right now. Good run game, play action pass, especially for this first week against the Jets, but then potentially going forward. Simple football, right? Run it down teams' throat, change the box counts, change the safeties on the back end, change the coverages, and then hopefully hit some explosives downfield. What? Comments here. Oh, Superwave says, do we know what percentage of his interceptions were option routes? I don't think that exists as like a metric. It would have to be like a charting perspective. And even then you're still kind of not guesstimating, but you still don't have, like, I can watch a play like 75 times and be pretty confident that like, oh, this is the coverage or this is the route or this is the concept. And there's a chance that it still isn't right. So that's a really hard thing to track, but I like where your head is at in terms of trying to pinpoint a source of interceptions or turnovers or problems. Oh, comment here. Honestly, even if I don't disagree with firing Dorsey, doing it off a loss like this seems so panicked and unplanned that it makes me trust McDermott. I think this is I don't want to get into this conversation necessarily right now. We'll see what happens when Kendall joins us very shortly. But I think the larger conversation of McDermott's decision to fire Dorsey, and again, it goes back to my question earlier. If the Bills don't have 12 men on the field defensively, that kick is missed. The Bills win that game. Or again, any of the other turnovers, drops, all these things, all these little breadcrumbs that culminated into the loss that happened last night. If the Bills beat the Denver Broncos, are we having this conversation right now? I think that's a genuine question to ask. If the Bills beat the Broncos last night, I might just be sitting here, having a Jets guest on, and we're talking Bills Jets, and the Bills are 6-4, and that's it. Like, if the Bills win that game, I don't know. And so I think I've been very anti-fire Sean McDermott just because of the consistency that he's brought to this team and how he's pulled this team out from the darkness, him and Brandon Beane. But I understand this notion and sentiment of, how this firing came about and when it came about, having it make you feel like you distrust Sean McDermott a little bit. It's understandable. Comment here from Handsome Man saying, perhaps a little less complicated offensive scheme. Some coordinators get a little full of themselves and get too creative. Look what happened in Minnesota by simplifying the offense, had no choice. It's interesting. We've heard so many things like laid at the feet of Ken Dorsey in this offense. Like, it's too simple. It's too vanilla. It's too complicated. It asks too much of players. But I do like that notion, again, tying in with that comment earlier. Um, for me, get back to the basics, establish the run game, play action pass, RPOs, get Josh on the move the pocket a little bit, make his legs a threat again, and try and add that dual threat Josh Allen piece back into this offense. I think that's where you start if you're Joe Brady, and really just, I don't think things have completely fallen off the rails, as the numbers have indicated. Again, the Bills offense through this week, they're third in DVOA, first in success rate, third in EPA per play, fourth in QBR, third in yards per play, second and third down conversion percentage, third in red zone efficiency. And even if you go from week 5, when they lost to Jacksonville, they're eighth in EPA per play, still first in success rate, 12th in dropback EPA, sixth in dropback success rate, third in rush EPA, first in rush success rate, fifth in third down EPA per play, fifth in third down conversion over expected, 10th in red zone trips, but second in red zone touchdown percentage. If they just limit the turnovers, just the turnover piece or the bad penalties that have caused them to stall, all of these self-inflicted wounds, like, this offense almost kind of corrects itself. And again, I'm not saying that to excuse Ken Dorsey or make him blameless, yada yada, as like everybody likes to jump on. But if they just stop shooting themselves in the foot, a lot of this offense works, and a lot of these problems that we've been having or been seeing and been talking about kind of correct themselves to a bit, to a degree. But with that being said, yeah, I think get back to basics. Run the ball, play action. Josh Allen's legs as a threat. Put defenses in a bind, RPOs, and attack, and that's it. Like, use that mode of attack, a more straightforward, less option route based, less mentally taxing load, maybe a little more locked routes. I don't know how hard that's going to be to install at this point, given how option based this offense is, but that's conversation we're going to have. Sab is saying Dan Orlovsky's comments on the offense really stand out as well. Yeah, I saw Orlovsky going off today. Kurt Warner also said some stuff that, basically contradicted what. It's funny. This Bills team, like, as being a case study for this season, is so funny. Like, there are so many who are who are tied into it's Dorsey's fault, both, locally and nationally. It's Dorsey's fault. Bills offense is terrible. And then on the other side saying it's not Dorsey's fault. Dorsey's actually good. Everyone is everywhere. Again, that's why I think it's so funny that this Bills team is such a focus from a case study perspective. But, Kurt Warner kind of said some things opposite of Dan Orlovsky. I guess it depends on who you subscribe to, from a national perspective and national analysis. But, I do think some of the points Dan made, and it's not just because they echo a lot of the points that myself and Eric have made on the film room, but I do think the under center piece, the motion piece, the play action piece, just a lot of the things that they've been successful with, but have not leaned into enough. Again, a big one for me is just the run game as a whole. Like, this Bills run game has been good. A lot of their losses have come when they have not successfully ran the football, both from an effectiveness standpoint and or from a volume standpoint. New England, the first game against the Jets, the game against Cincinnati, where they only had 8 running back carries, like, their lack of commitment to the ground game makes them one-dimensional. It puts more onto Josh Allen in this option-based offense, and it creates more conflict. So I don't necessarily, I didn't see everything that Dan Orlovsky said today. I actually was kind of out of pocket for a majority of the day today. I didn't even, and I don't have alerts on my phone for Twitter. I found out that Dorsey got fired because my dad texted me and had to pivot and redo the entire show for tonight. So I saw some of the stuff Orlovsky said, but it depends on who you go to. Like, Orlovsky says one thing, other analysts and pundits say something else. So it depends on who you trust and where you go. Black Panther 1 says there were drops and execution problems, but Dorsey's offense, besides the Dolphins game, hasn't been right going back to after our first 6 games last year. So this is one I push back on a lot. I think, well, one, last year, Allen's elbow injury significantly changed things. He could not make certain throws trajectory based and angle based because of how he had to adjust his throwing mechanics to correct for that torn UCL. So that changed some things. But also down the stretch last year, a lot of the nature of this Bills offense, the one I use all the time, is like how downfield based they were. And Allen was always chucking it downfield. A lot of people laid that at the feet of Dorsey, and it wasn't Dorsey's fault. There were other options underneath. Josh was very downfield attack happy, but also I think him going downfield was a more comfortable throw for him physically because of his elbow injury. I think those intermediate laser layered throws were harder to make because of the elbow. But even this year, besides the Dolphins game, I understand it too from a bigger, larger pass perspective, but you go to the Raiders game and how they neutralized Max Crosby with tight ends attached to the line of scrimmage and then use those tight ends and or running backs chipping out of the backfield, to use them to build into the route concepts that Josh Allen likes. The Raiders game was very well crafted. The Washington game, from a run game perspective, the concepts that they leaned into against the Raiders were different than the concepts they leaned into on the ground against Washington. So his ability to change that up and attack. Then you have the Miami game. I thought that 3-game stretch was really very good. And then obviously we've had inconsistencies in other games, but even the Jets game, I don't think the Jets game plan was terrible against the Jets. I put a lot of that loss on Josh Allen. Dorsey put Josh Allen in position to succeed against the Jets. Allen failed that game in a multitude of ways. Now, again, Dorsey could have put him in an even better position to succeed. But a lot of the mistakes in that Jets game, I think, came down to Allen. So I don't want to say, that the Dolphins game was the only game where Dorsey showed out. I think he had a lot of positives and a lot of wins in some other games. But it was just that up and down and that inconsistency and the execution standpoint and how it all tied together. So I understand that piece. Commenting from Jeffrey, echoing a lot of similar thoughts. Josh needs to stay under center, establish the run, more play action, more Kincaid. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when Dawson Knox comes back and what Dalton Kincaid's role and snap share looks like. Ooh. Interesting comment here from DF Forever saying, Ant, if we do not make the playoffs, is McD on the hot seat? It's, and also too, I'll approach it from two perspectives. If I think he's on the hot seat and if he will be, I don't think he will be. I don't think Terry Pagula is ready to get rid of Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott unless something dire or drastic happens. I will say if the Bills don't make the playoffs, I think everything is free game to kind of come at Sean McDermott. Again, I see all the sides of it. I understand the cases you can make for everything. Like I know what Sean McDermott has meant to this team and this franchise, and turning them from a drought era laughingstock to a consistent division winning Super Bowl threat year after year. But there's also the other conversation and the other side of the coin where it's like, the goal is to win Super Bowls and championships. And if you can't get your team over the hump and you're failing to meet expectations, when do you pull the plug at a certain point? Now there's a risk reward to all of that and to each piece in that conversation. But if the Bills don't make the playoffs, I think McDermott is on the hot seat nationally and with the fan base for sure. Will he actually be on the hot seat with Terry Pagula? I don't know, because Terry is kind of like a hard guy to read and predict. But if the Bills don't make the playoffs, yeah, I think McDermott will be on the hot seat nationally and with the fans, what the expectations were for this team coming into the year, which is interesting. Dan's comment here saying Dan Orlovsky commented that Dorsey called plays that required an execution level of 10 out of 10, as opposed to calling plays with an easier level of execution. Do you think this is accurate? To a degree. And I think this ties into what I said earlier and what myself and Eric have talked a bunch on the film room. The Bills offense is very, okay, if it's this coverage, do this. If it's that coverage, do this. If your defender does this, you do that. And so it's a lot of reading leverage and reading coverage. And when it works, it's beautiful because you cannot defend it. If you are basing your routes and your concepts and your decisions off of what the defense is doing, they literally cannot stop you, because whatever they do, they're wrong. It's kind of like an RPO, right? If you give that run action, if that defender comes forward, you hit the receiver behind him. If that defender stays, you have an advantage in the box. In theory, you hand it off and you get some yards on the ground. If you were running this like high execution option-based offense, when it works, it's indefensible and you're unstoppable. Problem is, it wasn't working a bunch. So I don't know if they required an execution level of 10 out of 10. I do think it was an execution level that, asked them to operate at a higher level and at a higher clip, because it was more read and react based than just straight up lock concepts. Here's the play, go out, or scheming somebody open. So I do think to a degree, it was decently accurate. I don't know if 10 out of 10, but it is an offense that requires high execution from this team. Oh, Kendall's about to come in. Messaging him right now. That's cool. And, again, Dan Orlovsky has been really tied into this offense this year, so it's understandable to see what his perspective has been. Super Wave saying option routes also delay time to throw. Also, no. I mean, in theory, yeah, because if it takes you an extra half a second to read what's going on, if you're the receiver and get to your route, if it takes Josh an extra half a second to read what's happening, that piece It all ties together. But without further ado, someone who is a regular guest on this show, someone who worked with myself and Eric in the film room, someone who I'm very excited to welcome back, Mr. Kendall Mirsky, who, I'm just very excited to have. Kendall, he's not on camera. He's a little bit like Bruce Nolan right now, a little bit of a recluse, I guess now, kind of hiding behind the shadows. But Kendall, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for joining me. I'm pumped to have you back. Make sure you're off mute. And then what's up? How you feeling?
Can you hear me?
Can hear you. Oh my God.
Oh, wow. It's been a minute. It was also a race against the clock just to get here before I missed all the fun topics. But
oh, there's been a lot of fun topics. There's been a lot of fun
I can only imagine a lot of
Kendall fell off. But we're gonna keep this conversation going. Let's go to I'm gonna pull up more comments as Kendall reconnects there. This is a good question here from Bills Are Electric. My question is, who is the hire as OC for 2024? In my opinion, Brady is just a placeholder. That's a real interesting one because I don't know how much of this is an audition for him versus like a realistic shot to win the job. I mean, if everything clicks and this Bills offense turns around and they go on a hot run and get on a heater and go to the playoffs and go to the Super Bowl, like cool, like you could see him being the offensive coordinator for 2024. But what's an interesting piece is when you have, and we've seen it already to a degree from a talent perspective and from a coaching perspective, you see it all the time with the good or consistent football teams. The Chiefs are a good example, I guess, well, maybe minus Eric Bieniemy, but when you have a team that wins consistently or has good players or good pieces, usually you get that, that quote unquote brain drain from your staff. And honestly, we've seen it to a degree with the Bills, right? Joe Shane left, Brian Dable left, those pieces. If Joe Brady comes in and this Bills offense catches fire and does big things, I don't know, does he get looks at head coach for next year? Like everybody's always looking to hire the next young, impactful offensive mind and take an offensive coordinator and make him a head coach. So, I think Brady's just a placeholder for right now. Again, we have to see what he brings to this team. There's a lot up in the air when it comes to, we know what Joe Brady was with LSU. We know what he was with Carolina, which was not good. But then there was that Matt Rule influence that kind of hand over him that for that entire time in his tenure. We know they clashed and they, had a big situation of button heads when it came to, offensive philosophy and design and ideology of how they were going to operate. But I think there's a lot that's up in the air again for Joe Brady. But if he has a great year, I don't know. Does he get looked somewhere else? And does he try to go somewhere else? The situation they could be in is having kind of a rotating offensive coordinator kind of year after year if they continue to hit on potential cylinders. But, I think that's a really good question because if he hits, does he stay next year? Does he go somewhere else? Does he get offers? If he fails, or if this team doesn't make the playoffs, he's most definitely not going to be the offensive coordinator in 2024. But we'll see what potentially happens. All right, Kendall's back in. So you just thought you were going to come in and say hi and then just like leave the show? That's what you were going to do? Oh, and it happened again. I give up. Kendall's fixing his comments. That'd be funny if I just dropped him just to do it to him. Jack coming in and saying, I don't blame Dorsey entirely, but he ain't helping Allen. That's a fact and time for a change. And again, that's the bigger piece and that's the conversation. Like at the end of the day, this offense wasn't getting it done. I'm still torn with it, with the notion and the idea of like firing Ken Dorsey, mainly because again, if they win that game last night, I guess my bigger gripe with it is the game that it came off of, because I don't think the failures on offense last night were due to Ken Dorsey. As even Dutch Flat says in the comments, Dorsey didn't put 12 men on the field goal attempt. And even just focusing on the offense, again, the Cook fumble, the Allen interception, the drops, and those drops came in big moments. Like Gabe Davis's was on a third down and it led to an interception. Diggs had a drop at one point. Dalton Kincaid had a drop that was on a third down and would have gotten a first down. All these pieces that went against the offense were not Ken Dorsey's fault. So this firing coming after that game is, I think, what really kind of gets me the most. But again, if you're Sean McDermott or you're this team and you're thinking, all those execution errors are stemming from Ken Dorsey and they are Ken Dorsey's fault, and you're blaming the drops and the turnovers on everybody playing so tight because they're not comfortable in Dorsey's scheme or offense or whatever. Maybe that's a bigger conversation. But I understand like the bigger picture, especially for fans thinking like with what we've seen since week 5, and thinking it's time for a change. I guess the bigger problem for me is the game that it came off of, because I don't think last night was Ken Dorsey's fault at all. Kendall, let's try one more time. Are you just gonna?
I'm ditching the podcast, Mike. It
Okay.
will not work.
Oh, but you sound good.
Okay, that's good to know.
Welcome
Glad
to the
to
show.
finally be here. Third time is the charm.
Absolutely.
That was miserable, but yeah, no, I'm happy to be here. Unfortunate circumstances of being here, but happy to be here nonetheless. Getting to talk to you again about Bills football.
You already got a comment from someone who said, "Isn't it past Kendall's bedtime?" Man,
It's
everybody just...
West Coast for me, so it's 7 p.m.
That's right. I love though that like everybody still like recognizes you and appreciates you, and just the
Sure.
immediate jokes that are coming to you right away. But Kendall, and I guess I've had like different banners up at different points, but I guess the conversation right now, I'll leave this banner up. For you, how much blame should be put on Ken Dorsey for not even just for last night, which I know you and I both agree that last night wasn't really a Ken Dorsey problem type of game, but what we've seen from this Bills offense this year, especially since that game against Jacksonville in week 5, where things started to fall off the rails a little bit, despite all the metrics and everything we've seen, how much blame do you put on Ken Dorsey for the failures or struggles of this offense really that we've seen the last month or so?
I feel like the weirdest thing is I think a lot of my issues with Ken Dorsey, it wasn't even schematic. It was so much more about managing personalities. And by personalities, I think I just mean Josh Allen. Like, it's so much more just about being a leader of men, which is a really weird thing to say because he was, the quarterback of a really great college team and he was literally a leader of men. And I mean, he is, as an offensive coordinator, like he did have success to a level, to a degree. But I just feel like there was so much, like there was a lack of congruency, I guess, in the vision of Sean McDermott and then how Ken Dorsey was managing Josh Allen, the person, because I think there was so much that aligned between Ken Dorsey and Josh Allen from just, I'm going to be this, gunslinger. I'm going to go for everything. I'm going to get after it. I'm going to throw the ball down the field as much as possible. Like there was so much alignment between those two. But then there's this mentality from Sean McDermott, which I love, but I don't know if it necessarily makes sense for Josh Allen, is, let's matriculate the ball down the field. Let's be methodical. Like, we don't need all these shot plays, but we're in this weird world of football where people are playing too high safety defenses and they're kind of forcing you to be methodical and keeping everything in front of them. Like, it's just a really weird time, I think, for all of this to be taking place, because we're coming off the heels of Dable. And I mean, let's not forget the times when everyone was calling for his job as offensive coordinator, which is really funny to look back on.
Every time the Bills play the Jags in like a regular season, it's just terrible.
Fire the OC.
Right? It's just the death sentence.
But I mean, specifically to last night, I think is funny. Like, last night, what happened yesterday, I'm going to shout out a friend. My friend Ryan asked me like midway through the game, you think anyone gets fired after this game? And I was like, no, not a chance. Like, they got to see things out. Like, this is a bad game. Even if they lose this, like, a lot of this is execution of the players. Like, they got to see out the season. And then the way the game was lost, even though it literally was not Dorsey's fault for losing in the way that they did.
Yeah.
Because of the position that they were in to win in a game that they shouldn't have been in at all. Like, it kind of then shifts the blame back to Dorsey, where it's like, well, all these mistakes keep happening and you are the orchestrator of this offense. So at what point is the execution of the players actually falling onto you? So I've kind of been going back and forth on how much blame I actually put on him and how much I actually put on the players. Because, I mean, the Cook fumble is bad. I mean, the guy never has two hands on the football when he's carrying. Like, when he goes into traffic, like, You rarely ever see him do that two-hand cover-up thing. Like, it really doesn't happen for him.
Yeah.
Davis, we know the drops issues. Like, it's been well documented. Kincaid somehow has more drops in 6 games or whatever than he has in his entire college
And
career.
and last night, things are going bad when Stephon Diggs drops a ball, Dalton Kincaid drops a
Yeah.
ball, and then Russell Wilson hit that touchdown to Cortland Sutton. I was just like, okay, I'm
Hey,
like,
I don't know if you saw the tweet. Most improbable completion in the next gen stats era.
like
That's 2016.
it was 3.2%.
Something
Or
like that.
something
Yeah.
ridiculous. And you know what I saw too? Somebody compared it to like the shot that he hit to Tyler Lockett, which was also like a
Right.
really low
Right.
probability
It's
in Seattle.
literally a throwback to all of those like Seattle versus Green Bay winners. Like,
It's just brutal. Like, and when that happens, and then you get the drops that happen on offense, it's just not your night.
it's a
And
little
when
Murphy's Law-ish.
1,000%. And what I was talking about earlier before, you tried to pretend like your mic wasn't working, you just wanted to try and show me up. The you mentioned the Cook fumble to like the first one to start out,
Yeah, like
and just
bad
like,
omens.
can you? So the Bills win the toss and take the ball, like, and that was a statement to take it to be like, you know
Right.
what, we're gonna drive down.
Coming off the heels of the Bengals game,
Yep,
all
coming
that
off the
stuff.
players only meeting, like they
Yep.
hear the noise and they know what's going on. We're taking the ball, boom, we're gonna take it downfield and we're gonna score. And the very first play you fumble, like how can you like imagine the feeling for that offense where you're just like, dude, like we're cursed. Like, did somebody is this a Pirates of the Caribbean situation where somebody like we took these coins and now our souls are all gone? Like it's
So
just
now that you
brutal.
bring it up, it that actually makes me put a little bit more blame on Ken Dorsey because right after that fumble, you saw Sean Payton decide, all right, I've just been gifted a free possession after they decided to receive the ball, which
Mm,
they've never done this year after winning a coin toss. They've decided to do the stupid analytical thing, which is accept the ball. And they gave us a possession. I'm going to
mm,
be very, very, very conservative, and I'm not going to get a
right?
turnover and give it back to them. I'm going to play really conservative because they're giving me house money right now.
Mm,
And he continued to do that through the entire game because the Bills kept gifting the Broncos extra possessions. And
yeah.
he stayed conservative, and it allowed the Bills to stay in the game, to be completely honest. But at the same time, Dorsey never realized that it was a field possession game from that point on. Like, it
Mm,
was never really a shootout. It was always very similarly to the Jets game. Like, they're not going to keep up with you on offense. You just need to play the field possession game or put
mm,
any kind of points on the board. It's not like you're playing the Chiefs. You don't need to be, scoring touchdowns in the red zone. Like, literally any points will help against an offense like the Jets, like the
mm.
Broncos. Like, there's a specific style of opponent that you need to adapt to. You don't need to play every single team like they're the Chiefs, the Chargers, like these high octane offenses. And I think we've kind of gotten stuck in that mentality.
And it's been the stuck piece is what I keep coming back to for everything for this offense. Like the phrasing I've been using on the show and on Twitter is a whole like chicken egg scenario for
Oh
like all
yeah.
these issues that have been going on for the offense. Because there's issues for me. There's issues like schematically, and I think schematically, and also from a sequencing perspective for this offense, especially with the up and down commitment to the run game, and especially when it is effective and it's kind of just disappears and then comes back, and the time it takes for Dorsey to adjust in game when things kind of hit the wall or hit the fan and don't go well. So there's been issues for me schematically and from a sequencing perspective, but I've also had a lot of gripes with the player execution piece,
Yeah.
specifically Josh Allen. But then it kind of just felt like we were stuck in this loop where it was like, well, is it Allen? Well, is it Dorsey? Well, is it Allen? Well, is it Dorsey? And there were all these pieces where Dorsey would call a play or there'd be something that wasn't great schematically, but then Allen would compound that badness and make things
Yeah.
worse with a bad decision or a bad throw. Or there were times where things did work from a schematic or a sequencing perspective, but Allen failed. And it just seemed like no matter what they did, they just could not get out of their own way. And I hate talking about it because there's nothing quantifiable or qualitative when it comes to being snake bit or having bad
Hmm.
luck. But you look at the turnover pieces for this team, and I think that's the bigger conversation with the EPA piece or the
Yeah.
bigger conversation within the EPA conversation. And, I know Brett Coleman put out that video over the weekend, and I disagreed with a bunch of it, but I loved his piece or the point on EPA, because the whole thing with EPA and everybody and their mother, and this, has been thrown out. Well, like, advanced metrics suck because EPA says the Bills' offense is good, and I'm seeing with my eyes that they're not. So these
Right.
metrics must suck. The whole piece with EPA is that it's expected points. So the Bills' offense is making all these plays and going on these drives where the data says, oh, you guys have done really good. You should probably score X amount of points on this drive. And then they have a turnover or a drop or a penalty that kills them, comes out of nowhere, and it's done. But the problem is those drive killers or those drive stalling pieces aren't enough to take away, like, you lose expected points in that, but it's not enough to take away from the total expected points that you generated on those individual drives. And that's been what's so maddening. Like, this Bills team moves the ball so well, and then it's literally like one thing per drive, and they get completely derailed. And then that ties into I think you got your other point there of, when that's happened in the past, I'd be like, oh, cool. It's like 2nd and 16 or 1st and 20. Cool. We'll hit like a 17-yard gain and we'll get right back on track. But with what defenses are doing now, not just against the Bills, but in the larger
Yeah, the
perspective in the
whole league.
NFL, like, those explosives are down. Now you're forced to be efficient. You're forced to matriculate the ball. And that is not the world that Josh Allen likes to live in regularly. And then you add in schematics or individual mental pieces on top of it. And we just go round and round on this circle of being stuck.
I think that's like the thing I'm most excited about, just turning the page and kind of spinning it forward. I'm back to managing Josh Allen. I'm really interested to see what Joe Brady does in these situations where, and I feel like all season, talk about getting snake bitten. The Achilles heel for this Bills team is failing on first down. Like, if there's a
Mhm.
failure on first down, it seems like the drive ends and they cannot overcome anything that happens after that. If it's a sack, if it's just an incompletion, like, if
Mhm.
there is any inefficiency on first down, this team, and it feels like maybe it was a Ken Dorsey thing, maybe it was that mentality alignment between Dorsey and Allen. Oh, it's 2nd and 10, it's 2nd and 15,
Mhm.
whatever it is. They're trying to get it all back on 2nd down. Like, if it's 2nd and 10, if it's 2nd and 15, 2nd and 20 because of a holding call, whatever it is, just get half of it back. Get 66% of it back. Like,
Mhm.
just get yourself into 3rd and manageable, because this team is, I think, top 5, top 7 or something in 3rd down completion or 3rd down conversion rate. Like, this team is
Yes.
good on 3rd down, but
On the year, they are second in third down conversion percentage.
right,
And if you just take it from week 5 through now, when they've been bad, they're fifth in third down conversion
right.
over expected.
Right. And I mean, and to be fair, back to even the EPA point, I think a lot of the funny and ironic part is the way that this team wins sometimes is on offense so unexpected.
Yes.
And that speaks to the unsustainability of it, then the turnovers, so it's almost like an oxymoron given the EPA conversation where it's like, well, the ways they're creating this EPA is so unexpected that it's also so unsustainable. And so what are we doing here? Like,
Yeah.
and then it plays into Sean McDermott maybe kind of being like, yeah, well, maybe we need to be a little more methodical, even though defenses are, we're playing into the hand of defenses making us that way. But if everyone's gonna zig, like, you kind of have to zag. And I, it's really just an interesting landscape given the way the NFL is going, given Josh Allen's skill sets, not neutralizing those skill sets, but also playing into the shift of the league as a whole. So it's a really interesting conversation, really frustrating that it's panned out in this way for us this season. But I am weirdly excited to see how the managing of, honestly, a lot of talent on offense is going to be going forward.
Yeah, that's a point I want to pivot to. In a minute, we're going to start talking about Joe Brady or potentially what to expect going forward. But that unexpected piece that you mentioned, I just kind of wanted to build upon that. Like, it's so much of this offense, and this, I'm not saying this positively or negatively. So much of this offense is tied to the yin and yang and the controlled chaos that is Josh Allen.
Yeah.
Like, the throw, the interception. Well, Cam Taylor Britt, when he picked off Allen against Cincinnati, cover two,
Oh,
he just sinks the whole time, doesn't even honor anything underneath. Like, that throw is never there. He is
yeah.
sinking the whole time, right? That's a stupid throw. You should not attempt that. it wasn't there. But also, if Allen puts it a bit more upfield, it could be completed. And also, even though it's a stupid throw and you shouldn't attempt it, we've seen him pull harder throws
Yeah, he makes
out
like
of his
two or
hat
three
before.
of those a game, and it then is feeding the beast.
Yes. And so you go there and it's like that's what it is. But then, like you said, that's not sustainable. Like you cannot, and even and I hate using the Brett Favre comp, but I think that's pretty accurate. Like even Mike Holmgren, one of the greatest offensive minds of all time, and like one of like the patron sons of the West Coast offense and how he learned it and bringing it to Green Bay and what he did with Brett Favre. Like he could not rein Brett Favre in all the time. He could
Right.
not control the beast that was Brett Favre, and they had to ride the roller coaster
Yeah.
that was Brett Favre firing darts that made you go wow, and then Brett Favre throwing an interception that made you go wow. And that's what Josh Allen is, for better
Yeah.
or for worse. And so
No,
I
for sure.
wonder, in the larger landscape, can someone, whether it's Joe Brady or whoever the next offensive coordinator is, or if things really go off the rails this year and Sean McDermott gets fired and you
Right.
get a new head coach that comes in, and if it's an offensive guy, so on and so forth, like, can you rein Josh Allen in and make him operate within structure while also not taking away that controlled chaos piece that makes him so successful? And because when he's on, like, it's similar to Patrick Mahomes, but Mahomes just doesn't shoot himself in the foot as much as Josh Allen does.
Well,
Like
I think
when
a big part is, let's not forget, Mahomes' first year was literally all about
mm,
reining in who he was.
and a
Josh
fair
Allen
point.
literally never had the pieces around him from a mentoring process
Mm.
to ever go through that.
And so I wonder, like, can they find that guy to
Right.
rein Josh Allen? Because one thing I think all the time, I love Ben Johnson as Lions offensive coordinator. I know a lot of people do, but like watching their offense last year in preparation for that Thanksgiving game was when I hadn't watched a lot of Lions tape at all before that game. And I followed them through the rest of the year. And they're obviously crushing it again this year. And I see so many comps for like, oh, Ben Johnson would be great. Ben Johnson would be great. But
Mhm.
so much of that Lions offense is based on timing and progressions and reads. Like you would, and I'm not saying Josh Allen would be a square peg in a round hole in that offense, but it would be a challenge. Like you can't just take Josh Allen and drop him into Jared Goff's role
Into
because
a Jared, yeah.
yeah, they're two completely different quarterbacks. But then you could make the case on the other end, well, maybe the offense is like that because there is no chaos creation potential with Jared Goff, and you need everything to work on time and in
Right.
rhythm. But it's
Right.
such an interesting conversation because you want Allen, you want that high variance explosive ability that Josh Allen has with his arm and with his leg, but you also sometimes need him to take a breath and take what's being given to him. And I think and this again isn't me giving Dorsey a pass. I think that's going to be hard for anybody
Yeah.
to rein in. You have to you got to be like Blade. You have to live in the light and the dark. Like you have to be a daywalker. And that's not a regular thing. Like that's super hard.
No, I completely agree. And I'm very open about, and I've been this way for a few years now. I'm very open about being against Josh Allen's play style. Like, I think being beaten up by Tom Brady my entire childhood, like, kind of made me fall in love with the methodical approach of quarterbacking. But like, let's be honest, this is the best quarterback we've seen in Buffalo for some time. So
Mm.
you kind of have to take the good with the bad.
And
So
even that real quick, like, did you see the video where like Allen
yes,
and
yes,
Brady or whatever, and Brady's talking about like checking it down and taking what
Josh
defenses
is just
give you? Yeah.
smirking.
Josh is just like, no. And I think
It's
no.
just
And like,
not who he is. And it's
no.
honestly, it sucks, but it's also fine because it literally has gotten us to this point of hope.
Is it fine, or is it the dog with the at the table and everything surrounded by fire
It's
going, it's fine.
it's it's the dog at the table saying it's fine, but there is potential to, like, I don't know, maybe cook up some food with that fire. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there are some positives to the fire going on around you.
A
Like,
little silver lining.
yeah, like you can make some positive out of it, and I think that is what Josh Allen is. Like, oh, it's fine. We're burning, but like, let's find a positive from this burning.
Who's got some steaks? Can
Yeah,
we grill up some steaks? Let's just try to make a
let's
positive.
just grill it up.
And so, with everything that's gone down, leading to the firing of Ken Dorsey, good move, bad move? Are you cool with it because did you just think it was time for a change? Do you really think that the multitude of issues here on offense, and again, I know it's there is some semblance to the notion of, everything starts from the top down.
Mm.
So, a head's got to roll at some point. But where do you sit overall, like on the Dorsey firing? Are you cool with it? Do you think it was justified? Do you not like the game that it came after? So it made you like a little less comfortable with it? What are your thoughts overall on the Dorsey firing and where this offense has been?
Overall, I think it was both warranted and unfair. I believe that everything that has happened over the last 2 years with the offense just having these weird spurts, just kind of sputtering around, just
Mm,
really no identity, like what's going on, what's the thing that they go back to, and then still being really good metrically and still finding ways to put it together and still win games makes me feel like perhaps it was a little unfair, especially because of what happened last night, and it
mm,
makes me feel like he's just a scapegoat. But at the
mm,
same time, let's be honest, like I just said, there were a lot of reasons. Like the writing was on the wall for this. Like even let's say the Bills make the playoffs. Let's say Dorsey made it through the year. The Bills made the playoffs. They get bounced in the first round. Like he's
mm,
probably getting fired. You know what I mean? So the writing was on the wall. I just feel like, particularly after this game, it was kind of a scapegoat moment where it's like, we need to quiet the fan base, the media. We need to divert attention from maybe what's really happening. And this kind of brings me into my next point, which is, look, I'm not one to say that Sean McDermott should be fired, especially at this juncture, especially where he's gotten this team in the last 6 years or whatever it's been.
mm.
But I'm finally starting to willing to listen to arguments. Like I've been an apologist for years over that. Like every close game, roll all the heads, like get rid of McDermott. And yeah, like he has had a lot of mismanaging moments, but let's be honest, like him forcing the Broncos to kick that bonsai field goal was fantastic game clock management, to use those 2 timeouts and realize that if I use these strategically, it will force them to be in a position of, do we want Josh Allen to have 30 seconds and 2 timeouts on the clock,
Mm.
or do we want to kick a bonsai field goal? Like Sean McDermott made that bonsai field goal happen and they missed. However, obviously 12 men on the field, and then that falls on the person with the most responsibility over the team, which is Sean McDermott. So it's very ironic in that way. So
Mm.
I'm very open to listening to those arguments for the first time, I think, in the McDermott era.
This question got posed to me earlier in the chat, and I'm going to ask it to you now.
Sure.
If the Bills don't make the playoffs this year, how much is Sean McDermott on the hot seat for you? And if so, how much?
I think it really depends on the record, especially considering the opponents ahead. I believe it's the tied for third toughest remaining schedule in the
Yep.
NFL at this point.
Yep.
So like it's a gauntlet down the stretch. Like I'd be happy to get to 9-10 wins, and I think, I don't know if that's enough to even get in the playoffs given the AFC picture right now. But you know what I mean? Like if it finishes at 9-10, given shaking up the offensive coordinator, I don't know if that's enough to like really put him on the hot seat, but it also depends on all the context going into each one of those games. Like, do they drop a game to the Chiefs? Do they drop a
Mm,
game to, I'm trying to think of another AFC opponent, like the Chargers? Like, obviously they've
Miami.
beaten up on NFC opponents and lost to all AFC opponents. So
Which is even worse. The fact
I
that
know.
they've got 5 losses and all 5 are in conference is driving me like
No, it's the
nuts.
worst. It couldn't go any worse. But that's what I mean. Like it really depends on the context. Like if those are close losses specifically to AFC opponents when you know they're big games, yes. Then I think I'm like, okay, this is a realistic thing. He is on the hot seat. Like they should start looking around, see what's out there. But like, what's out there?
And I think that's the bigger conversation. Like what's the phrase? Like the devil you know is better than the devil you don't.
Yeah,
And not saying that McDermott's a devil, but
right,
yeah, like
right.
what we've seen this franchise, and I don't think you can operate necessarily out of fear or fear of the unknown. But yeah, man, like it's even Ben Johnson, as much as everybody loves Ben Johnson. Oh, it's so funny. I see a comment from Nikki G that literally says hashtag hire Ben Johnson. Like for all we know, like Ben Johnson could be terrible. Like
Right.
there's still people who want to run. Zach Taylor was the hot name. And I know the Bengals have been to a Super Bowl, obviously, but
Hey, he had
they're
a tough first few years. Like he
yeah,
was on the hot seat for like 2 full seasons.
people hated him. Like,
Yeah.
they wanted him out. There's still people that
Oh yeah, I'm
when
sure.
they lost that Super Bowl, I know, like, Bengals fans personally, and then a bunch even on Twitter that were like, what sucks now is we went to the Super Bowl, which means Zach Taylor will get another, like, 2 seasons. Like, he sucks so bad. And it's just like, damn. Like,
Exactly. No
there's
one
always
likes the devil they know.
no, and there's always some risk with bringing in someone new. Like,
Yeah.
there's no guarantee for anyone in any way, shape, and form. And it's possible to go back. Is it possible to elevate this team and get them over the hump with a new coach and staff? Absolutely. Is it possible that this team goes back to the dark ages and everything goes terrible again? Absolutely. Like, it's you're running that risk reward potential and opportunity, and it's just so wild to even I like have that conversation with how this season has gone so far. Like, even with the loss of the Jets, and again, which I think more of that game fell on Josh Allen than it did coaching staff or schematics. Like, there were plays that were available there to be made, and Josh just was like, nope, YOLO, and was making throws left and right that shouldn't have been made, and they lost that game. But then they course corrected, and they pounded the Raiders, and they pounded Washington with good offensive design and defensive game planning, and then they stomped Miami, and the injuries happen, and the offense gets more like efficient while also being very inefficient and kind of stuck in the mud. And yeah, it's just wild to be sitting here at 5-5 with this team and knowing I'm trying to find out what would be the most like ironic way for the Bills to not make the playoffs. Like, it would be like them going on a stretch where they win. Like, they beat the Jets, and they beat Philly, and they beat the Chiefs, and they beat the Chargers, and they like crush them. And then they'll lose like the last 2 weeks of the Pats and Dolphins and not
Nah,
make it
bro.
like
It's
just some
what it
ironic
is
way.
CJ Stroud running the gambit, forcing the Jaguars to get into a head-to-head tiebreaker with us and we lose. That's what it is.
So, man, I love what the Texans are doing. Also because they
Same.
were like my dark horse pick earlier to like back in like June-ish, July-ish. But watch what they're doing is just watch what they've been doing is just so fun. And then
It is.
again, I think that's also part of it too, right? Like, I think fans see, I don't know how many times I heard or saw, like, I was watching Texans tape and posting a bunch of their stuff yesterday, and the amount of comments that I got through on Twitter was like, man, wish like the Bills could do what CJ Stroud does. Man, wish the Bills offense had someone like Tank Dell. And just like, man, like everything is just comparison because you watch what the
Right.
Texans did to the Bengals defense versus what the Bills
It's
offense
just a
did versus the Bengals defense.
completely different quarterback. It's a completely different quarterback. The way CJ Stroud operates in the
Oh yeah.
pocket versus Josh Allen is not an apples to apples comparison. They win in entirely different ways. And yes, they're allowed to be compared because they both play the same position,
Mhm, mhm,
but
mhm.
because they win in different ways, you cannot analyze it the same.
Yeah, and they're different roster makeups, different skill sets, different things schematically. Like, it's a different piece every single day of the week for the Texans and the off and the Bills for what they are.
Yeah,
And then also
completely.
too, I mean, I know Stroud won the game. He also almost gave the game away
Yeah,
by throwing
right.
that stupid interception to Cam
Right.
Taylor-Britt right before that, which I was screaming at my TV when that happened. But yeah, it's wild to see the position that the Bills are in, and part of that position that they are in. Again, Ken Dorsey is out, Joe Brady is in. So many variables when it comes to Joe Brady. I mentioned some numbers earlier in a comment to some people. Let me go back and find them. So again, Brady was the OC in Carolina from 2020 through 2021. Fired on December 5th of 2021, so didn't make it a full 2 years, but did about a year and 3/4.
Remind you of
Christian
anyone?
McCaffrey, what? What'd you say?
Remind you of anyone? Didn't make it a full 2 years as OC in the NFL?
That's supposed to be Ken Dorsey.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's not great. Christian McCaffrey was significantly hurt in both of those seasons, 2020 and 2021. Injured, spent time in injured reserve with a high ankle sprain in 2020 and then a hamstring injury in 2021. Some numbers from each year. So in 2020, 54% motion rate. So again, these are me just picking numbers that I think people find interesting because they're hot button things that everybody talks about now, even if they don't fully understand them. 54% motion rate, seventh highest in the NFL in 2020. But like I mentioned earlier, there is a difference between using motion for leverage and or to create spacing or scheming someone open versus just using motion to ID a defense.
Right.
So 54% motion rate, nonetheless, seventh highest. Like I mentioned earlier, bunch of heavier personnel looks. So in 2020, 18% 12 personnel, 8% 21 personnel, 5% 22 personnel. That's in 2020. In 2021, 18% 12 again, 8% 21 again, and 6% 22 again. Again, he didn't last that whole year. Also had a 10% screen rate in 2021, which was seventh.
Yikes.
There's a lot to be kind of figured out when it comes to Joe Brady. And I know people point to the LSU offense and talk about how awesome it was. And then again, the time in Carolina was also muddied too with him and Matt Rule button heads and who wanted the offense to be one way versus how Brady wanted the offense to be the other. And they butted heads philosophically and from an ideology perspective, which kind of begs the question, like why you would hire Brady in the first place if you guys were on opposite sides of the spectrum, unless it was more of an adjustment piece. But my thing with Joe Brady as a whole, I just think given where we are in the season, it's going to be hard to expect like a dramatic shift schematically in the
Right.
Bills offense. Like you're 11 weeks in or 10 weeks in going into your 11th week. What the offense is what the offense is. You can't uninstall and reinstall a brand new offense. So I think the more realistic changes that we should expect to see would be more little tweaks and dials being moved, levers being pulled, buttons being pushed in terms of personnel usage, play calls overall, situational go-tos, sequencing with play calls. Again, I think it'll be more, dials being turned a little bit here and there, levers being pulled up and down here and there. I just think it's going to be too much to expect like a wholesale change from an identity or ideological perspective for this offense. What are your expectations from Joe Brady, whether it's this week going forward? Do you have any? Are you excited just because it's new blood? We'll see what can happen. Do you believe in Brady? It's funny. Eric posted earlier today when him and myself broke down some Joe Brady tape when he
Oh
was
yeah,
announced as the
throwback.
QB coach. Yep, in 2021 or no 2022, when he was announced as the QB coach of the Bills, which was interesting. But what are your thoughts here on expectations for Joe Brady? And I guess by extension, expectations for the offense
Hmm.
under Joe Brady.
Yeah, I think I definitely echo your thoughts on like not completely reinstalling the offense.
You can't like how we're especially in a
No,
short
no.
week, like, but let alone, I mean, maybe the bye week
That's
presents an
my thought.
opportunity for
After
some
the
to get
Eagles game, week 13 bye, going into Kansas City, like in week 14, I think that's a prime time to.
they come out of the bye and they're running like the triple option
Right,
wishbone
like they're
offense, which
doing
is great.
completely different. No, but I do think we're going to see things we haven't seen in 2 years, or I mean, frankly, maybe even in Josh Allen era in that Week 14 game versus the Chiefs. Because let's be honest, the Bills were probably even in the Ken Dorsey playbook, they were probably holding things close to their chest that they were going to break out for the Eagles, the Chiefs, the Cowboys,
I've been
Chargers.
saying that all year, like specifically the Josh Allen run game piece. I've
Right,
been I've been saying it all year. Like I really feel like they were waiting until like the back end of the year to bust it out so teams couldn't scout
right.
it and use it. But the problem is they hit so many ruts and obstacles that it was
And
like you
now we
kind of
don't
need to
even
break it up. Exactly.
we're not even going to get to that point. But the
Exactly.
irony now is that we're going to get to that point with a completely different offensive coordinator. Like he won't have time to install anything new for this Jets game specifically. Maybe like a few plays here or there for the Eagles game, but I'd expect like a couple packages probably for that Chiefs game. I think the interesting thing for me is, I mean, what we knew him, I guess what he's most famous for is that LSU offense. And that was very spread oriented,
In which
but
he was not the offensive coordinator for that team. He was their passing game
passing game
coordinator and wide
coordinator.
receivers coach. So I just
Right.
wanted to put that out there.
And the obviously the talent on that team was like just fantastic. So it's really
Ridiculous.
tough to compare exactly how he would want to utilize things. And is spread even the way to go? Like, I know we've seen a lot of success from Josh Allen when we go empty, when we spread it out. He gets to see the field, he gets to use his legs. Naturally, he gets to use his legs, like not schematically.
Mhm, mhm.
So I think there's something to chew on there, but then like you bring it back to the Carolina years and we're seeing more heavy personnel. And then I check the rosters and it's like, all right, well, we got Chris Manhertz, we got Ian Thomas at tight end. Like maybe he kind of had to do that. Like
Mm,
I'm kind of curious just to see philosophically and schematically what he wants to do given
mhm,
the talent on the roster. And obviously right now we're kind of handcuffed to just Dalton Kincaid as the tight end, whatever Reggie Gilliam is, but I think we're probably going to see a bunch of not spread, but just 11 personnel, and maybe we see a little bit more under center and
mm.
specifically under center
Yeah.
play action. Because I mean, let's be honest, that's the stuff that's been missing. And I mean, aspirationally, I'd love to see some under center runs with
Mm,
success. Like I loved how much success the Bills had last night. Uh, in the run game, but my
Mhm.
God, all of the success was on tackle wrap
Oh, yeah.
from shotgun. Like
Right.
every single, like they spammed it like 4 plays in a row, and I'm
Yeah.
sure everyone's like, "Oh yeah, I love Josh Allen and no huddle. It's the best." It's like, guys, he just called the same play like 5 different times from the same formation. Like, how were the Broncos not even onto it? They may have flipped the play a couple of times,
Can't
but like,
stop it. You can't stop tackle rap.
you can't stop this. But at a certain point, like, well, you can because you just ran it 6 times on one drive. Like, it's
Yeah.
gonna get stale. You can't just keep going to that well. So I would love to see just a little bit more multiplicity in that regard. But like we just both said, you can't just install new things right now, especially on a short week, especially against a defense as good as the Jets. You kind of have to keep it simple for this week and hope the talent reigns supreme. You just can't make mistakes. I mean, really, it's come down to turnovers. As
Mhm.
bad as things have been schematically, like a lot of this season has come down to turnovers. So I don't know how much of that is really going to fall on Joe Brady, how much of that is really
Mm.
fallen on Ken Dorsey, but maybe it is just a management of personalities, especially on the Josh Allen front. I mean, it's really tough to figure out what to expect specifically. Oh, I had another thought.
Mm.
RPOs.
So I have
I
an
mean,
RPO piece coming up. Go ahead. Go ahead.
right. We've seen, I mean, in the past with Joe Brady, like we know he's RPO centric, but back to the install thing, like we're probably not going to see new stuff, but I want to see different RPOs utilizing Kincaid. I'm
Mm.
kind of sick of this same like pre-snap motion, then we just hit this RPO flat to Kincaid. Like we've kind of been sticking with that for like 5 weeks now.
Mm.
And sure, it works for a good 4 to 7 based on how much Kincaid can get after the catch, but I want to see a little bit more wrinkles to that where maybe there's a Kincaid and a slant coming over top of it. And I don't know. I think there's a little bit of limitation on what we're doing with Kincaid in the RPO game specifically.
Mm.
Just because of how heady he is. I just think we need to get
Hmm.
him more involved in different ways than just one.
You know, it's funny. My RPO piece was tied to the tackle wrap and dart run game piece, and
Oh, interesting.
it was one of my favorite things Dorsey did all year. That Bengals game, the Buccaneers game, they start putting RPO or like having an RPO based off of the tackle wrap play or having pass tags off of it. And they started cooking the Bucks with that. And that was when I really started to think, okay, like this offense has really turned the corner because now they're taking their most successful run concept and they're spamming it, but now they're attaching pass tags to it and RPOs to it. So now they can stay like with that basic run concept, but they can keep running it because now you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, because they
Right.
have the pass tag or RPO piece attached to it.
Right.
And that got me so excited. And that's a piece I wonder, can Joe Brady build upon, like with his experience with the RPO game and what like he did from a passing game coordinator uh, aspect, like my brain completely shut off just now, aspect with LSU. Like, do we see more RPOs in general, or do we see more RPOs developed on top of their run concepts?
Hmm.
And because that, again, that tackle wrap RPO piece got me so excited. I was watching, oh, I don't remember when, but I was watching an interview with Jeff Stoutland, the offensive line coordinator or offensive line coach for the Philadelphia Eagles, who's arguably like the best O line coach in all of football. And he was talking about the Eagles offense and talking about how every run that they have a pass off of that run, like play action, but it's the exact same look. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. And
That's
the
probably
pro,
smart to build layers off of
right?
something that's successful.
And you have that from like certain team to team, but like the Eagles have it for every single run. And then you see like what they do this year, and granted, like or this year and last year, and so much of it is tied to what Jalen Hurts can do, but
Right. Right.
how diverse they are in the run game and the pass game. And I want some more of that, not necessarily like making Josh Allen be like Jalen Hurts, but I want more of anything that, you know, you and I talked about it in the offseason a ton with the year before and then Kincaid and with James Cook and all these ideas of like multiplicity and
Yeah.
making everything look like everything.
Right.
So when a personnel grouping comes out, the defense has to be like, oh man, they can run anything out of this. And then even when you snap the ball, the defense is still like, we still don't like know what it is.
Have we seen them do the thing where it's like we have a tight end, say Kincaid and Knox on the field with Cook, and we just go to empty or motion back to someone in the backfield. Like, have we seen that this year? I feel
Not
like
really.
maybe twice.
Maybe a couple times, but it wasn't like any usage of Cook with it. It was literally just like, "Yo, bro, just go motion out and just be a placeholder on the outside."
Right, just
Like
run a
in the
quick hitch.
basic literally, I was literally gonna say like a 3-yard hitch and just sit there. Yeah, so not really. Like, and I want more of that multiplicity piece. I want so what that's why I got so excited after that Buccaneers game where I was like, man, like the most successful thing for the Bills
Yeah, they
offense
did with
this
them.
year was tackle, wrap, and dart. It was successful for them last year. It's how they iced out Miami, no pun intended, on that Saturday night game in the snow. They ran it 5 plays in a row right down their throat.
Right.
They used it against the Giants this year to turn the tide. And so when they
Yep.
started putting pass tags and RPO pieces with it, I was like, okay, maybe this is the layering. Maybe, and if Dorsey could do it there, okay, let's see what else he can do going forward. And we just didn't see it enough. I'm hoping Brady can lean into that piece because it's a basic thing. It's something that it's a tweak. It's not a new install. It's not a
Right.
new concept. It's based and built upon something you're already successful with, and it's in his wheelhouse.
Yep. No, I completely agree with that. I think that's a very fair ask, and it's fair expectation, to be honest, because it's based in fundamentals. It's based in something that's already existing. It's, yeah, like you said, not a full install. You're just adding layers.
And again, it's such an easy piece. Like, and I mentioned earlier before you got on, like someone else asked me a question like, oh, like what expectation or how would you measure success for Joe Brady in
Mm.
this first game? And for me, it starts with establishing the run. Like I'm going back to simplicity, like establish the run, and then I'm going play action. And I'll take it in whatever form I can get it. But if I can get some under center play action, cool. And potentially generate some explosives that way, cool. Especially going against the Jets, who you and you and I tried to tell people last year before that first game against the Jets that the Jets defense was very real. And despite how bad their offense was, that it was going to be a hard game. And then the Bills went out and lost that game. Granted, Josh Allen had some brutal turnovers in that game that turned the tide, and his elbow got hurt at the end, and Gabe Davis had that big drop.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, like this Jets defense is so formidable. They are so good. Their front is so good. I worry about the Bills being able to run the ball against their front because they tried a little bit in week one and they just lost out. And that was another piece too. Like they really started my like annoyance with Dorsey, not with Dorsey, but just how everybody saw everything. And because I've been critical of Dorsey going back to October. Like there's a tweet of me saying like he's relying too much on Josh Allen to be a unicorn, and that's not a proper way to run an offense. And you and I both broke down a whole bunch of stuff that we thought he needed to be better with, but we also recognized that there was like player execution pieces that were causing problems as well. And there were so many concepts from a run perspective, like that sprint draw that everybody hates. It was there on several reps against the Jets, but John Franklin Myers blew up Osiris Torrance, or
Mm.
Quinnen Williams ran through Mitch Morse. And it was like, okay, again, I can understand the other side. Maybe because you want to be like, well, Ken Dorsey shouldn't call that play if his O-line can't handle up front. But there are certain things that just come down to a player execution piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm worried about the run game and letting everything get into a rhythm and let Josh Allen settle down because that Jets front is so nasty. Forget about what they do on the back end and how they mix coverages and how strong they are from an athletic and technical perspective at the corner spots and what they can do on the back end and how good CJ Mosley has been now that he's healthy again and what Quincy Williams looks like and all this. But I just worry about them being able to get the run game going against that strong quality front for the
Sure.
Jets
Yeah.
and the kind of pressure that it puts on Joe Brady. That's also a piece as well. Like I think it's super unfortunate. Like I wish his first game was against the Broncos or his first game was against the Raiders or somebody. I wish it wasn't like the Jets are coming to town. They think they have your number and they kind of do. And they're also really good and they know you're wounded and they're coming for blood. Like, so jump into the lake and if you can swim, good luck. If not,
But
Godspeed.
see, back to my point earlier, I actually think this is a good position for him in the sense that he's going up against an offense where they need to prove that they can
Yes.
beat someone. Like the Bills offense does not need to win this game. They just can't lose this game. That's all they have to do. And that's a terrible mindset. Don't get me wrong. I hate the mindset of playing not to lose.
Just don't lose us the game.
But no, but really, like that's all that has happened. The Bills have not lost a game this season where they've won the turnover battle. Like you don't turn the ball over. You don't give them extra possessions. You don't give them better field position than they're like the Jets are going to struggle to put up points if they have to drive 75 plus yards.
Mm.
So make it that style of game, and it's not any more complicated than it has to be. Expectations aren't score 45. We can't. That's funny. But
Okay.
I'm looking at it now. The Bills haven't scored 30 plus against the Jets since 2021. Like,
That was a huge thing for me, like, going into the Jets in week 1, like, even when the Jets were awful in 2021, like, the last year under Dable, like, the Bills struggled against them
yeah,
that last down the stretch. It was part of the reason why people wanted Dable's head because they were like, "The
right,
Jets suck, they can't even," and that was bad Jets. That was
right,
no
right,
Sauce Gardner, no DJ Reed. That was before they revamped everything with free agency. That was banged up and really a shell of himself slash non-existent CJ Mosley.
right.
Like, that was no kind of defense, and they struggled with it. This is also too, like, Robert Saleh has seen the Bills a bunch going back to
Yes,
2020 when he was the Niners DC. Granted, the Bills lit up the Niners, but the Niners
right.
had some injuries in that game. So he saw him in 2020, then twice in 21, twice in 22, and now once already in 23. Like, he's got familiarity and he's a good DC. I know everybody was like making fun of him because how weird he is or whatever with Hard Knocks this year, but he's like a good defensive coordinator and they got or a good defensive mind, and they have a good DC with Jeff Ulbrich. And they've got talent on that side of the ball. Like, but I like where your head's at. Like, don't that would have worked in week 1. Like, don't beat yourself. That's it.
Yeah,
Like, don't
no,
turn the
that's
ball over and the
literally
Bills
all
win
you
week
have to
1.
do against teams like the Jets or the Broncos. Like, they aren't teams that regularly put up 20 points. It's literally a race to 20 points. It's not more complicated than that.
Oh, I really hope he can establish some kind of rhythm. And I do wonder, like, what, again, like, how much we see from a different standpoint, whether it's tweaks, whether
Mhm.
it's, again, and it could be anything. Maybe he comes out in this game and 90% of the game they're in 10 personnel,
Right.
or Reggie Gilliam sees like 30 snaps in this game, like something that would indicate, oh man, this is what he's leaning into, or
Yeah.
oh, this is like what he wants to be. But again, like, I think from the larger perspective, I know a lot of people are like, man, this is awesome. Dorsey's gone, like, new offense of Joe Brady. I don't know how much of a new offense you're gonna get because you can't uninstall and you can't uninstall and then install a new offense
Mhm.
in the middle of the regular season, let alone on a short week. Like, that's a very hard thing to do.
Yeah, I would definitely pump the brakes on that idea. I think it's fair to get excited about, the potential of Joe Brady and what we
Mhm, mhm.
could see through the rest of the season. But for this specific week, I think we're going to see a little bit of rust, maybe a little bit of motivation, players
Mm,
trying to prove that it wasn't their fault, maybe they were being held back. Like, I mean, think about the Raiders. I don't it's not an apples to apples comparison because there was a lot of animosity for the Raiders and they had something to prove when
mm.
Josh McDaniels left, but there's probably a little bit of that feeling where the Bills players feel like they could be better than what they have put forward this year, especially the offensive guys specifically. So there
Mm,
might be a little extra motivation for them this game, especially the salt in the wound from the last Jets game. I'm sure there's going to be some
could be.
motivation for this one.
And part of my thinking too of like just the offense helping themselves out more, like and again, this isn't to give Dorsey a pass. There's a lot of like self-correcting issues for this offense if there's just better execution. Again, like the Broncos game, and this is the question I posited earlier. Like, are we having this conversation tonight, right now, if the Bills win that game last night? Like, I don't think we are if the
That's
Bills
kind of
beat the
my
Broncos.
yeah, that's my thought
Which
on the scapegoat thing.
which also is what bothers me, I think, the most about the Dorsey firing. Like, am I okay with it? Sure, fine. But like the game that it happened after, like, really, like that one, the one with all the fumbles and the drops and the interceptions, and then the 12 men on special teams, like
It
all
feels
of
like a
that,
diversion.
right? Like, that's the guy like that it just makes me feel like, yeah, like, oh, have you ever watched Succession?
No, I still haven't.
It's fantastic, but in the one season where like they're all on this boat and they have like the dad is like, well, I have to fire somebody, so who's it gonna be? And they're just like going around, like, everybody's trying to be like, well, it can't be me because blah blah blah. He's not picking anybody legitimate. He's just like, listen, the press is gonna want a head, so
Yeah,
I gotta pick
exactly.
somebody.
Oh, that's what it
And
felt like.
to have that, like, to have this be the game that it happened with is what annoys me, I think, the most. But tying it
Mm,
back to like my previous point, so many of those things that failed for the game, for the offense, were just again, even like the bad luck piece of it, and I hate saying this, but like not only does Gabe Davis drop a third down, catch opportunity that would have converted to a first. Not only does he drop it, but it bounces through his hands and it's intercepted by Justin Simmons.
Right.
But then I guess the luck works for the Bills later when Cook gets stripped and then it bounces right back in his hands. All of
Yeah.
these like individual variables and execution pieces that had like nothing to do with Dorsey. If you can just eliminate some of those from a player execution standpoint, if you get more consistent play from your pass catchers, if you get more ball security from Allen and or the running backs, like if you just uptick some of that consistency a little bit, a lot of these problems start to, provide some remedies. Now, it's not large scale wholesale fixes and all of a sudden everything's great and they're cooking on all cylinders, but if you reduce some of those self-inflicted wounds from a turnover standpoint, especially like you mentioned, all of a sudden this offense starts to balance out a bit more. And then it's less about, shooting yourself in the foot. And it's more just, okay, let's go out and try and execute. But even if they just at a baseline stop turning the ball over and stop it's not only the misexecution, it's how significant the misexecutions have been. Cause like when they fail, it leads to like a 10-yard penalty, or when they fail, it leads to an interception or a fumble. If they can just mitigate that, they just become baseline and then you can build from there. And that's huge, like you said, in a game against an offense that really shouldn't be generating much unless Zach Wilson, I don't know, puts up 50 in this game, which would make me throw up.
Yeah, if that happens, then there will be more heads rolling. On your turnover point, I already said the Bills are 3-0 when they win the turnover battle. They're 31-3 when they win the turnover battle in the Josh Allen era. Sorry, 31-1, not
That's
31-3.
that's
31-1. Guess what the opposite is since 2018? When they tie or lose, they're 27-32.
oh damn. That's significant.
It's a pretty correlative stat, turnovers.
That's
It's
huge.
pretty
31 and
impactful.
1. 31 and 1 when they win the turnover battle. That's nuts. What I also think too, like it speaks to if they're not turning the ball over, I also think this ties in what we were talking about earlier. Like if they don't turn the ball over, I think that usually means like Josh Allen has controlled the chaos and you're getting the successful high variance Josh Allen without the risk. Like
Yeah,
you're
you
getting
know those like Patriots games when he dumps it down to Devin Singletary, when he hits Isaiah McKenzie on the occasional deep crosser. Like
so
those
beautiful.
are the like controlled, organized chaos games that I
Mhm,
think we all idealize, right? Like
mhm,
there are moments of chaos. He's running away from Matt Juden. Oh, he gets a deep pass down 30 yards downfield. Like it's going to happen. Like that's part of him when he gets under pressure. Like he's going to flush out right. He's going to throw the ball deep. Like it's
mhm,
part of his game. But the in between moments have to be those, okay, quick one step, three step in rhythm, drop throw. Like it's a very he is one of the best in rhythm passers in the league this season. The problem is we're not seeing consistency from the offense in what they want to be. Do they want to be an
mhm.
in rhythm style team? Do they want to be a timing style offense? Or do they want to be a team that struggles to scheme up around a player that plays out of structure?
That's a fair question. I think like the identity of this team, and especially because man, I hate saying it because I know everybody's gonna hate it. I want their identity to be like a good running football team. That's what I want the identity to be.
Hey, they
Like
got
take
the
it back.
horses. They got the horses this year.
I just want a downhill running game. I don't care. Give me tackle wrap, give me duo, give me any downhill run game piece, and then tie the Josh Allen run game on top of it, whether it's with modern day triple option football with RPOs or zone read or QB bash and pin and pull, like whatever the hell, like establish the run
We
early
see
and
how
make.
much pressure it takes off of Jalen Hurts. It's made his career very easy during his development. I mean, I shouldn't say very easy, but much easier
Oh
relative
yeah.
to what it could be.
I also think too them going out and we'll see what happens this offseason, but them going out and getting AJ Brown to go along with Devonta Smith
Right,
and
right, right,
Dallas
right. Yeah.
Goddard and all their horses. Like they've invested more on the offensive side of the ball from a weaponry standpoint. But it's I mean, again, like that scheme, like we talked about, like they can get into so much from a run game perspective and
Mm-hmm.
from a pass game perspective, and they lean into that dual threat piece of their quarterback. And if the Bills were sitting on the Josh Allen run game piece, I've said all year that I think they were waiting for the whole kind of like break glass in case of emergency,
Mhm.
and the Josh Allen run game piece was that. It's an emergency. Like, you have to. Like, this is basically every week from here on out is playoff football. Like,
Yeah.
you need to lean into that aspect. You need to lean into the athleticism of your offensive line, which I think they do with tackle, wrap, and dart. Like, Spencer Brown and Dawkins are both good on the move. So cool. Lean into that.
Yep.
I also like that concept also ties into let Osiris Torrance just be big and maul dudes and pin them
Yeah.
down. Like, it
Yeah.
just works so well. And Mitch Morse can climb to the second level. Like,
Right.
lean into your strengths more. Try
Yeah.
to establish some semblance of an identity or rhythm. The at least I want to see them commit to the run more, but at least they have concepts that I know work for them and that they can lean into. I
Mhm.
wonder what they lean into from a pass concept perspective, because so much of this offense is option based and reading and reacting and processing after the fact. Like, I wonder what Brady leads into. What kind of connection does he have with Allen? Because we know Allen vouched for Dorsey. So
Right.
this is an offense Allen wanted to be in and wanted to continue with. And maybe he still does as of right now. Like, I think that's also a piece too. Like, is Allen sitting here going like, man, this sucks? Or is he like, good, I didn't want to be in this offense anymore anyway? Like, but
Mm.
what kind of relationship does Brady have with Allen? Does he know what Allen wants to do? How much input does Allen have? Because that's also a conversation starter as well. How much input did Allen have into what was going on right now? Like, maybe Allen just wasn't executing an offense that he really actually wanted to run. And maybe he blames himself more. Like, what Brady, like the behind the scene things that really kind of
Yeah.
put all the pieces further together in a nice little row to figure out what they are. Because from a passing perspective, the offense is disjointed,
Yep.
inconsistent, and predictable at times, especially situationally. Like, so Brady leaning into certain concepts to kind of stabilize that is something I'm very interested in seeing. Again, whether we're going to see that immediately against the Jets or not, I think that's like the biggest challenge on his plate. Like, I think it's not easy, but I think it's easier to kind of use what you did earlier. I think it's easier to be like, well, we're going to run the ball with the stuff that works and we're going to go play action. Okay, cool. Like, what are you doing with the rest of the passing game? Because there's got to
Keep
be more
running
than just that.
stick. Just keep running stick. It
That's it.
works.
Just run stick. Just go play action and take moonshots.
Yeah,
That's
in
it.
between all of the things that you were saying, just run stick.
That's it. It worked.
Everything
Hey
will
man,
find
it worked
itself.
for Justin Herbert and Joel Lombardi.
That's what I'm saying, man. They
So why
move the
not?
ball down the field, and then maybe you just make some better decisions than Brandon Staley.
Stick is sexy, and that's what it's all about. Nobody.
Just keep getting 4 yards.
That's it.
Just keep getting 4.
There's no reason to run a route past 5 yards. Like, what are you doing? You're just being obnoxious. Like, why are you trying to get more than 5
No,
yards?
I just it's funny because like it's not the option, but I do think I think stick helps settle Josh Allen. Like the times that we do run it, I really feel like it helps settle him down and realize, wow, this game's kind of easy. Like like wow, that like little just 2-step drop and just get rid of it. Like, oh, Khalil Shakir's right. Wow, that was easy.
Yeah, but then
Why don't
there's
we do that all the time?
but then there's times where Allen has it and he's like, no, I'm not going to take
Yeah,
it
I
for
want
some
more.
other
I'm gonna
reason.
flush right.
Right? Yeah. It's second and 3, and I've got a 7-yard completion right there to Shakir.
This is the
No.
time to take the shot because it's 3rd and 3. We can get that all day of the week, and then they don't.
No. Yeah, it's a very interesting piece, and again, a whole
Yeah.
conversation that we're sitting here and having like is very interesting. Just again with how the season has gone and what it looks like potentially going forward. Kendall, final thoughts from you on Dorsey, Brady, Allen, the defense, the offense, McDermott, anything, whatever is in your head, whatever bee is in your bonnet, now going forward, the floor is yours. What do you got?
I am truly going through the phases of mourning. Like like I was in denial last night, and then this morning I was like, can I please get a tweet telling me someone's been fired? And then someone was fired, and then I was like,
Did you know when you and I were texting earlier, did you know he was fired already?
I did.
Okay.
That's why I texted you. Yeah.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
I realized that after the fact because I
Yeah.
was like, oh wait, he got fired.
No, and then I saw the tweet, and then I was like, okay, I wanted this. Let's process this now. And then I processed it, and I was upset that he was the scapegoat, but I did kind of realize something needed to change, especially offensively. So moving forward with the offense, I am hopeful and excited to see that, there's just opportunity to see what else is out there. Like, is the grass greener? Is it not? Like, we just get answers kind of sooner. Because I know, I mean, just watching TV today, like everyone's asking, oh, Super Bowl window open, close. And it's like, guys, the window's open. It's just, there is a finite amount of time. Like there is only so
Mhm.
much Josh Allen that we have. So it is smarter to make this decision, ahead of that clock.
Mm.
We're finding out our answers as soon as possible. And I'm just excited to get more answers. That's kind of where I am. I don't necessarily think this is a lost season, but we are on the cusp of it. And if it turns into a lost season, it just means we're finding more answers to the future. Who is the
Mm.
new core of this team? Because, like, let's be honest, with the injuries, with the money allocation that we've
Mm.
seen on the cap, like, things are changing in terms of who the pillars, the young core of this team is, and I'm just excited to see kind of where it turns.
Hmm. That's a fair point. I'm dead inside, and I've started to move towards prospects and scouting.
Yeah,
It's
it's
where my
kind of what
head
I
is at.
said, just a little more flowery.
Yep, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I was again like in watching so much of the tape and then doing the tape plus the metrics and analytics. Like and this is gonna sound super douchey, but like I really feel like I see everything from all sides, and so I would have been okay with a multitude of things. Like I would have been cool if Dorsey stayed. I'm cool that Dorsey got fired. I'm cool with Brady. I'd be cool with someone else. Like I
I
there's so
think because you understand it from all angles, it
mm,
makes processing this so much harder because there were so
mm,
many different ways handling this morning
yeah,
could have been handled. So it
yeah,
makes it really hard to process. Is this
yeah.
the right move forward? Was this the wrong move forward? Like I can empathize.
It's just and yeah, like to that point, like, and I said it earlier, I think my biggest issue with all of it is like the loss that this came after. Like, and again, I
Yeah,
understand you have to like it has to build and it culminates, yada yada, but this being the loss to do it after, like, bothered me, I think, like the most part of it or the most about it. But yeah, it would have been cool if Dorsey stayed. I'm cool that he's gone. I'm cool with Brady getting an opportunity just to see what happens. Like, I'm truly putting no stock into anything until we go like
right.
week to week. Like once Daquan Jones went down,
Mm,
I didn't feel good. When
mhm.
Milano went down, I felt worse.
Yep.
And this team was such a complete football team that the skill and ability that they had on defense also played into the offense's hand. Like you could tolerate more of risk reward
Right.
Josh Allen
Right.
because of
Yes.
how good your defense was. Like your defense could bail you out of situations because of the ability that you had on that side of the ball.
And that was complimentary football at the
Absolutely.
time.
Absolutely. Like you can take those risks knowing you kind of have a get out of jail free card at times with that defense. And with the multitude of injuries they've suffered on that side of the ball, like that get out of jail free card has become fewer and farther in between. And when that happened, I didn't feel great. Like I didn't think they were going to beat Cincinnati, so like that loss didn't have me on the ropes at all.
Yeah.
Like I thought they
Same.
were going to lose. I was bothered the way it happened. Like that Kincaid fumble
Yeah.
still eats at me. Von Miller missing that tackle eats at me because like they were close and still could
Right.
have won it. Um, and that's also another point too, like that conversation too. Look at all the turnovers and snake bitten things that happen in that game. That one or
Mhm.
two play differences here changes that outcome completely. But again,
Yep.
I digress. Like, so I was fine after that one. This one really got me. Just not only that they lost, but all the little breadcrumb things that happened to make them lose. And then having the 12 men on the field, like that broke me. I didn't sleep. I was just in a horrible state. I didn't want to even do the show tonight. I was so annoyed, like with everything. And then the Dorsey news dropped, and I was like, well, I got to do the show. And this is where we ended up. Like, I even like, when I texted you like late last night, it was really just to like have kind of like, where do we go?
Someone make me hold me
That's
accountable
right.
for this
I
podcast.
basically was just like, I don't feel like doing the show, but I like hanging out with Kendall. So I basically was like, if Kendall will come on the show, I'll feel better just kind of like talking through stuff. And then lo and behold, like this day ended up becoming a very important day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just man, like it's a disappointing scenario to see where this team is in. But I say all that to say I don't think the season is lost still. They are not mathematically eliminated. And really, they're not like this team still has ability. Like if you told me they beat the Eagles and they beat the Chiefs, like I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't think that's crazy. Like
Yeah.
I also
Yeah.
wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised if they lost to the Eagles and the Chiefs. Like that's
Right.
just the way like things have gone. So I don't think it's a lost season. I do think it's interesting to see. And I think just from the bare minimum perspective of seeing what this team looks like. Like, is Joe Brady auditioning for a real full-time job as OC for potentially next year? Who starts to emerge as core guys for this team? Like, and watching what develops offensively and defensively,
Yep.
like, there's like a lot of potential questions that can be answered going forward. Even if, the Bills aren't the Super Bowl team that we had hoped or thought they could be, there are some questions that'll get answered one way or another. So it's a very interesting point. Kendall, any last parting thoughts before we get out of here?
Nah, man. Keep hope. Like that's really the main thing. Like whatever you think about the season being over or not, I mean, expectations were really, really high for this team, and it's obvious that Bills have fallen short of those expectations at this point. But hey, they're only 10 games in. The only team that's really beaten the Bills this year is the Bills. So
Oh,
let's
good point.
let's see what happens from here on out and just see if they can course correct. And if not, then we turn the page. Like we're all used to it. We've taken eyes on the draft in November before, like we've been here before. It's just different because of expectations.
That's why I messaged you. I was like, I want to look at some 2022 Cam Kitchens and Tyler Nubin tapes. So like to me, like I've already been started to like compile a bunch of college tape. Like I'm gonna start diving into it as we go forward. I'm going to the Senior Bowl again, so I want to get more.
Nice.
Yep, I'm excited again. So I want to go and get more. I mean, I was super prepared for last year, but I crammed it all into like
Right.
about a week
Right.
and a
You
half.
don't want to do that this year.
So I want to have more of like a relaxed, pacey experience, but we'll see. Yeah, I don't think the season's lost. It's just an unfortunate spot to be in, but we're going to find out a lot about this team again from a player perspective, from an offense perspective, defense perspective, Sean McDermott perspective. Like, because again, if they flame out and they only end up with 6 or 7 wins or 5 wins potentially, if things go completely off the rails, like then it becomes a more real conversation
Yeah.
when it comes to
Yeah.
calling for Sean McDermott's head and all those potential pieces. So yeah, it's a long haul, but I am dead inside, which allows me to just be objective and watch tape and pull numbers and metrics. And my favorite piece of it is like just putting out a clip of being like, hey, here's this play. And the people who are upset come through and are like, it doesn't matter because so and so sucks. Everything's bad. I'm just like, oh, like
And
I just posted a clip.
everyone's dead inside. That's what it tells you. Everyone is dead inside, but we're all processing it in different ways.
Everybody just processes their grief differently, and that's where we're at. But yeah, this was a fun episode, despite the fact that the circumstances that came about and what caused this episode. But I want to say to everybody, thank you very much for joining myself and Kendall tonight. Whether it was painful for you or exciting or whatever emotions this episode brought about in you. If you haven't already, please, 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 and thank you, drop a like on this video. It goes a sincerely long way towards helping myself and the entire team to track and trend in front of more eyes and ears. So if you haven't already and you enjoyed this episode or you enjoy the content or the channel, please drop a like on this video if you'd be so kind. Again, the show sponsored by One Pie Pizza, the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. Go check the online menu in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or whichever podcasting app or platform you're listening to this show on. It is November, so they are starting their Toys for Tots drive. So if you live in the Buffalo area, they got a bunch of prizes and things coming down that I'm going to be announcing as we go forward. So even if you don't want to just donate toys just to donate toys, you also get potential prize opportunities from them. Prizes last year were like autographed Bills and Sabres memorabilia, tickets to Sabres games, stuff like that. So they give good pieces. So go check out One Pie Pizza, do your taste buds some good, do the community some good, and get some One Pie. Please rate and review and subscribe to this show if you are listening on one of the podcasting apps or platforms. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever have you, rate and review and subscribe. Please subscribe to Disguise Coverage here on the YouTube channel as well, and to the Cover One channel as a whole. We have you covered every single day with anything and everything Buffalo Bills. Again, drop a like on this video if you'd be so kind. I appreciate all you folks who rode with us live here on this episode. If you didn't ride with us live and you are watching later, listening later, whatever have you, thank you very much for your post-live view, listen, download, whatever have you. Thank you very much for Mr. Kendall Mirsky for coming out of the shadows and making an appearance for the first time in a long time. So yeah, thank you, Kendall. Thank you to all you folks. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. I will see you tomorrow night, Wednesday, November 15th, 7 p.m. Eastern, for another episode of the Cover One Film Room with Eric Turner. We're going to be diving into a lot of important pieces, Joe Brady related and offense related, with film and advanced metrics and all those pieces that you have come to expect on that show. So I'll see you tomorrow night for the film room. If not, I will see you next Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern, for another episode of Disguise Coverage. And until then, help you and your family and friends and loved ones, again, are all doing well and staying safe. Be kind to one another. Take care of one another. I see your comment there, Richard, that you just put that they put in there. I appreciate you, Richard. I hope you have a good night as well, and good luck with your grief if you have any. Godspeed. See you next week. And as always, go Bills.